Human rights defenders do to protect and strengthen privacy and data protection? An easy first step is taking digital security measures yourself. This can be as simple as using encryption and anonymity tools and encouraging your friends to do the same. Human rights defenders can also advocate for alternative digital business models, which aren't based on the extraction and sale of data. Economic pressure on the existing model is already growing. For example, over the last few years, the number of users using ad block software globally has exploded. There is evidence that this is already pushing companies to less invasive advertising practices. Engagement in debates at the national and regional level is, of course, crucial. Where privacy protections are weak, human rights defenders need to actively advocate for stronger ones. And even where they are stronger, we need to make sure legislation is keeping up with new technological developments, like the Internet of Things. Ultimately, if we want things to change, human rights defenders need to make these issues accessible and relatable by being more creative about the way we talk about them. When people see how data protection and privacy affects them on a day-to-day basis, they may be more inclined to engage with these concepts. In the next video, we'll be taking a closer look at freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Miles from Learning Innovation Hub PH. Welcome to our info session on data privacy in human resources. This 3-hour info session aims to help you as HR practitioners identify the potential risk in data privacy and the general approaches in addressing them. Before we start our session, a quick reminder about this training program. 1, your microphones are automatically muted so that to avoid unnecessary noise that may distract our session this morning. 2, I would like to request everyone to rename themselves with your first name, last name, and your company name for attendance purposes. 3, if you have questions during the sessions, kindly click the raise hand button or unmute your audio to be recognized by the speaker. You can also type your question in our chat box. 4, an answered question will be read and answered towards the end of our training program. 5, soft copy of certificates will be sent to your email at the end of our training program. 6, if you have any questions, please feel free to send us a message on the chat box located in the Zoom platform. 7, for those who are unable to join the Zoom meeting, you can watch this info session via Learning Innovation Hub PH and Cosane Consulting Facebook pages. Before we start, let's have a Mentimeter activity. Please get your secondary devices. It could be your mobile phones, tablet, laptop, or desktop, and go to your internet browser. Please type in www.menti.com and enter the code 83792289. Again, the code is 83792289. Then click on the thumbs up logo for us to know that you are ready to participate in this activity. Right, let's begin. First question. We would like to know the sex of the participant in this meeting. Please type in your answers. All right, most of our participants are female. Let's proceed to our next question. I would like to ask the position or designation of the participants. Please type in your answer. All right, most of our participants are HR staff and HR manager and HR officer. Okay, let's proceed to our next question. We would like to know what industry you belong to. Please type in your answer. Please do not write a specific business trade as it will be asked in the next question. All right, so most of our participants are from food industry, hospital services, manufacturing. All right, let's proceed to our next question. All right, now let's kindly type what is your business trade. Customer support, hospital, electronics, telecoms, financial services. All right, next. We would like to know how many participants here are streaming via Zoom or Facebook page or Facebook Live. Please choose your answer. So most of our participants are streaming via Zoom. All right. And lastly, I would like to know your learning expectation in this info session. Please type in your learning expectation. Informative, how to avoid DPA violations. All right. How to properly manage data privacy of employees, legal acts as concepts of data privacy in Human Resource Department. All right. Thank you everyone for actively participating in this Mentimeter activity. And again, welcome to our program. And at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker for this morning. Our first speaker is an Enterprise Information Security Senior Consultant profile. He has a total of 13 years experience in the field of information technology applied in different industries such as banking institution, manufacturing, human resource management, IT/BPO, non-bank financial institution, health and government. He also performed the function of the data protection officer and compliance officer for privacy and implemented end-to-end compliance activities based on the National Privacy Commission's compliance framework, as well as international compliance methodologies for several industries such as IT/BPO, government agencies, LGUs, prenet insurance, health maintenance organization, contact center shared services, maritime manning companies, hospitals, pharmaceutical, and financial service. While in the other hand, our second speaker has 6 years experience in compliance rules related to Philippine Data Privacy Act of 2012, governance, risk, and compliance, anti-money laundering, which includes the United States Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act of 2010, know your customer compliance, and transaction monitoring for consulting firm and an international bank. She performed the role and functions of a compliance officer for privacy and conducted the end-to-end process of data privacy compliance as mandated by the National Privacy Commission in the following industry, such as maritime mining companies, non-banking financial institution, IT/BPO, and prenet insurance. Our speaker has engaged in assessing the compliance of an executive search company with its implementation and compliance to information security management system, following the requirements of ISO 27001. She regularly conducts Data Privacy Act awareness sessions, as well as security measures orientation to both executive management and personal organizations. She has an acquired experience and certificate in International Advanced Certificate in Anti-Money Laundering awarded by the International Compliance Association in partnership with Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. She also acquired training on the information privacy management. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Ernest Oxon and Ms. Charm Dogma. Mr. Oxon and Ms. Dogma, the platform is yours.
Hello, good morning. Hello, hello.
Good
Yeah.
morning, sir.
Thank
Good
you.
morning, everyone.
Morning po.
Morning. For those who said good morning, thank you. Good morning din. Sabi natin, good morning. For those na ayaw magano.
Good morning.
Good morning po, ma'am. Sige. With that, let me just share my screen.
Good morning.
Sige. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Yeah. So hello again. Good morning. I'm Blue Boy with Miss Charm. We're from Cosent. Yeah. So we partnered with Learning Innovation Hub to conduct these free sessions on data privacy, especially yung risks in human resources. Okay. So as mentioned earlier by si Miles, so yun yung ating topic for today. Sige. To jump right into it, ito yung ating maging agenda. We'll do a recap on data privacy. The reason why it's a recap, it's not a full-blown data privacy awareness orientation. Okay, so just to be clear with everyone's expectation, a data privacy awareness orientation would take longer, and it would mostly focus on the data privacy itself, principles, the tenets of data privacy. But here we would like to focus on the second agenda, which is the data privacy risks in HR. For most of you here, that's your profession, that's your function. So we would like to focus our discussions on that. And then, and lastly, we'll discuss takeaway points. What can we do to identify the risks and mitigate them? And according to the National Privacy Commission in the Data Privacy Act of 2012, what is it that it requires from us, from our organizations, us from HR, to do or to implement, to accomplish, to be able to comply with the data privacy regulation, right? But before we jump into our recap on data privacy, I would like all of us to participate in a small question, just to get our, just for us, to say in HPH, for us to get to your understanding, ano ba yung data privacy challenges natin in our companies? Okay, so we'll load a website where you can actually place your question. It's a Padlet website. The link is in the chat box of the Zoom. Once you've seen that, it will show you the question that we need to actually answer. Okay. Sir Ray, can you share your screen for that? Yeah. So for those who have loaded already the website, the question is, what are your current data privacy problems? It may not necessarily be HR specific. It can be the data privacy concerns, problems in your organization. So just for us to give, just for us to get an idea, for you, what are the problems in data privacy? What are your concerns? So we have question, how do we store all documents in the office? That's one pertinent question, especially for files, for documents, electronic and physical, that contain personal and even sensitive personal information that we are no longer using. So salary comparison in HR and operations management. Okay, that's also a good question. Yeah. So it pertains to the disclosure, diba? The sharing of compensation between employees. Kunyari, lalo na yung mga new hire, yung mga fresh graduates, lalo kung isang grupo sila pumasok sa isang organization. They tend to, uy, ikiting sweldo ko, magkano sa'yo? What needs to be in an employee NDA to comply with data privacy? Okay. So that's also a good question. Ano nga ba laman ng mga non-disclosure agreements natin? Often, yung nakalagay dyan would be, dapat confidential yung information, dapat hindi siya dinidisclose basta-basta. So with the data privacy regulations around the world, especially yung sa DPA natin, it begs the question that we need to review the non-disclosure agreements that we have our employees sign in order for us to align them better to the provisions of the DPA. We don't have a comprehensive DPA policy. So with regard, that's a challenge or that's a problem. Ano nga ba ang comprehensive DPA policy? What is it that we need to actually be writing in our policies, in our privacy documents? So we can answer those as we go through our session today. Lack of proper information about the DPA. Yes, that is also another challenge or problem of organizations. Often, the most knowledgeable person about the DPA in an organization is the DPO, Data Protection Officer. And yun nga lang, companies fall short in extending that awareness. Na tipong si DPO lang yung pinapadala sa training. Kasi like we've been saying in the past, it takes the entire organization to comply with data protection regulations. Limits of DPA, email communication, social media platform. So hanggang saan ba yung extent ng Data Privacy Act? Especially when, in the way I'm getting this question is, email communication and social media platforms is the disclosure or sharing of information. Up to what extent ba yung sakop ng DPA? And yung also to a certain extent, what actually can we share, diba? In social media platforms, emails, communications, health issues besides the nurse and HR, who else can know the employee's illness? It depends on the policy. But from my understanding, it's all often HR, diba? And I guess yung company nurse, or company doctor. But aside from them, sino pa nga ba dapat? If it's based on the company's policy na dapat alam ng supervisor, then siguro dapat ang alam lang niya yung dapat lang niyang malaman. Hindi naman yung the entirety of the illness or the entirety of the health status of the employee. Nami. When coordinating with third parties, when you need to ship out prizes or gifts for your employees. So what is it that we need to disclose, diba, to third parties, to external partners? Ano lang ba yung dapat natin mabigay? Siguro hindi naman lahat or hindi man ganun karami. Can you integrate the roles of DPO with other roles in the company? Good question. Later, as we go through the presentation, we'll be able to somehow tackle that question. But to give you a quick answer, for bigger companies, yung mga medyo malaki talaga, they actually established an office, a data privacy office. They have a team of data protection officers. They have a department solely for data privacy compliance. For most companies na hindi naman din ganun kalaki, what they did was the DPO is a secondary role. So it's either the IT head, IT department head, the corporate secretary, the HR, minsan yung admin, or yung training head, diba? Siya yung nagiging DPO. Often, hindi mo often, some companies actually have the DPO as a tertiary role of a person. So, pag gano'n, ibig sa question, gaano pa nagagawa ng tao na yun? Yung all three roles na. Especially with being a DPO, it demands quite some time from a person, diba, to comply with data protection regulations. Kasi hindi siya it's not rocket science. Nothing against the DPA, but it takes a lot of time. As we will see later, so marami talang gagawin. Okay. Hindi naman siya ganun kahirap. We will not be solving complex equations. However, it does take a lot of analysis, a lot of time, interviewing people, writing all of these documents. So if it's a secondary or tertiary role, it begs the question, for HR, it begs the question, kaya pa ba nung tao na yan? Yung pagiging DPO niya. Okay? Do we need to hire a DPO or can it be a contractual position? By law, by the DPA, the DPO needs to be a regular employee position. If not, if it's a contractual basis, it needs to be a 2-year contract. Tapos, ano ba? We don't know. How can we secure employee information? Okay, that's a good question as well. See, employee information, as we will see later, is the one being protected by the Data Privacy Act. Kasi employee information would include personal information, name, address, contact information, and mostly sensitive information, as we will see later. Kung ano ba yung sabihin ng sensitive information? Kasi mag-iba sila, personal and sensitive. Now that work-from-home workers are on the rise, it is becoming difficult to know who is really working and who is not. To what extent can employers monitor or investigate whether or not employees are really working during declared working hours? Yan. That's a question for work-from-home engagements or remote work. So, with the DPA, meron lang tayong certain, of course, meron tayong limitation on how we will monitor our employees when they're doing work from home engagements. So what we'll do is we have a specific slide later for work from home arrangements. So we'll try to answer that question there. Okay. Thank you for your question. Best online software to store and secure to on files, especially now we are a work from home setup. Pagdating sa software or platforms for HR functions, I'm not as familiar. Ano ba yung mga available platforms? Marami. Pagkakalam mo, marami na eh. And there are some already na who would declare that they are data privacy compliant. So you might want to review those. Do a quick search, marami na yan. Pero siguro, with regards to using external softwares or software provided by external partners, we have a section later in our slides na ano ba yung kailangan natin gawin to better secure and ensure that these providers are actually complying to data privacy regulations. Okay, what else? Yeah, sige, I believe that would be it. Unless meron pa kayong question, you might want to message lang here in our Padlet. Sige. For those questions na hindi ko gaano dinaanan, or binasa lang natin, we will be dedicating specific slides to answer these questions. Kasi kasama naman siya sa magiging discussion natin on the recap and on the data privacy risks in HR. Given cloud-based storage and functionalities and soft copies going around, shouldn't the terms of the data privacy law be amended or revised? Siguro ang magiging tanong natin dyan is, good conversation about that later, doon sa Q&A portion natin is, ano ba yung tinutukoy natin dito na should the terms of the data privacy law be amended or revised? Kasi currently, as per the DPA, it does cover already physical and electronic documents. Diba? So, whether it's in our computers, kung electronic documents, if it's in our computers, mobile devices, personal man or company issued, it's in the file server, it's in the cloud, it's in our email, excuse me. It's all covered by the DPA already. So now begs the question, ano ba yung mga privacy policies natin regarding the storage of electronic files, electronic documents containing personal and sensitive personal information? Part na kasi siya ng DPA. So later, we'll try to provide answers on that. But aside from providing answers, we'll provide ways to identify ano nga ba yung answers natin for these kinds of questions. Ano yung mga security measures that we need to be able to implement. Any other questions pa? Charm, did we miss any question? Nabasa naman yata natin lahat.
Parang okay na po lahat. Ay, may pumasok.
Using Google Sheets for updates of personal info of employees, is this practice considered acceptable? Like I said, like we mentioned earlier, na other platforms to store, update, diba? Employee information. We can use naman. Diba? Wala namang bawal kasi sabi. Ang kailangan lang kasi sabi ng DPA or any other data protection regulation is that we need to be able to ensure that these are secured. Kahit yung platform na ginamit natin. Maybe Dropbox for online storage, yung OneDrive, or Google Drive even. We're not advocating any tool or a specific brand, but these are commonly used to say. So if you're going to use online spreadsheets, Google Sheets is one of them, sa Microsoft is also one of them. Marami naman libre. Yung kailangan lang natin ma-ensure is sino may access dyan. Is it secured? Ano ba yung information being stored there? Ano ba yung information being collected? And how long is it being stored in these online cloud storage providers? So yun yung gusto natin intindihin. Sige, any other questions? Thank you. Siguro if you can get a screenshot of this survey, para at least we know na ito pala yung we can answer later during the course of our discussion for this morning. See, with that, we can now move into our discussion. So, sorry, balik ko lang yung ating screen. Excuse me. So yun. So like I said, yung agenda natin, it's a recap on the data privacy. When I say recap, these are just a few slides. Malamang kasi by now, since you're here in our info session, you've heard about it. You've heard about the DPA, you've read about it, you've heard about it with someone, you've tried to implement already your compliance program, you tried to comply already with the requirements. So we're here to discuss and be on the same page of our understanding and interpretation of the law of the DPA. Kaya tayo may recap. Okay? It's not necessarily a data privacy awareness orientation. We do conduct that separately. If you want, you can contact us. We can discuss that offline. Yung next nating agenda is yung data privacy risk ng HR. Ano ba yung mga risks na sasabi ng data privacy when it comes to processing personal information, especially employee information. And of course, like I said, takeaway points natin. Ano ba yung gagawin natin to comply with data privacy regulations. So recap lang on the Republic Act number 1173 or the Data Privacy Act of 2012. So data privacy regulations, including ours, protects the information of individuals. All right? It does not necessarily cover corporate information, company secrets, diba? Business information. It covers the information of individuals. So may it be our employees, customers, partners, managers, yung workforce natin, stockholders, consultants if we do have, external partners, applicants, former employees, kasama din dyan, visitors. Kasi lahat ng information about people that our company collects, uses, process, yan ang scope ng data privacy. Okay? And these individuals, all of them, including us, tayo mismo in our company, are called data subjects. Okay? Again, para we are on the same page of our understanding. So it begs the question for us in our different companies, sino-sino pa ba? Aside from the ones posted here in our slide, sino pa ba yung mga individuals whose personal information we use, we collect, we store, we disclose to other organizations ang kinukuha natin from in our companies. So meron pa kayong naisip na tao na that our company is processing information of a person that our company stores, you may freely write in our chat, in our Zoom chat. Kung wala na, ito siya. Generally, ito siya. Kung meron malamang na specific for your business, for your company, then yon. As long as it's person, sige. Yung ibang companies, ang kinukuha pa nila yung family members. Yung information about family members. Dependents. Di ba? Kunyari, when processing HMOs, yung dependents, yeah, kasama siya. So, what about data subject information? About the information about these people are considered to be, that needs to be protected. We have to, yung personal, tsaka sensitive personal information. So, marami pa, meron privileged information, meron din financial data. So, ang focus muna natin for now, at least for this morning session, is personal information is sensitive. So, ano ang personal information? It's anything, any information that can help us identify an individual. So, that's personal. There are some debates, conversations that even yung metadata about people can also point to an individual. Kunyari, buying patterns. Ano yung purchase history sa isang online retail? Ano yung mga gaano ka kadalas magpag-gas siguro sa isang gas station? So these can, in a manner of speaking, diba, if collected with other information, can help us identify someone. Diba? If you use, sinabi dito ni Sir Marcos sa ating chat, algorithms, AI, diba? Kasama na yan ngayon eh. So all of these, if can help us identify an individual, that's personal. But mostly it's name, contact information, address. So ang sensitive, medyo specific siya. Hindi siya medyo specific siya according to the law. Medical records, education, work experience, race, ethnicity, religion, age is also that. Government-issued IDs are considered sensitive. So bakit ba may delineation between personal and sensitive information? Because if personal information yung nakuha sa atin, ano ba yung pwedeng mangyari sa isang individual? Ano yung mga risks, diba, yung harm sa isang tao? I don't know if you've heard about the news way back siguro early 2018, 2019. Yung pasa load scam, I guess people still receive that. Uy, pinadala kita ng loan, pwedeng pakibalik, magkamali ako, ganyan. May mga nabibiktima ng parcel load scam na ginagawa ay binabalik yung load. So what happened in that news was, nung binalik yung load, akala kasi totoo, ni-request nung nagpadala, quote-unquote, na, airplane mode yung phone mo so I can, para ma-process daw yung pag-return ng load. And during that time, naka-airplane mode yung phone, reverse social engineering na yung, well, in this case, magnanakaw. Nakakuha siya ng replacement SIM card for that person kasi nagpanggap siya ng boyfriend. Tapos eventually, ang dulo nun, nabawasan niya yung bank account ng tao. Napasok niya yung bank account online, nakuha niya yung savings ng tao. So, ano lang alam niya? Name and number. Personal information pa lang. So what happens if sensitive personal information yung nakuha sa atin? So what happens if may nakakuha ng medical records natin, work experience natin, education natin? So that can actually lead to identity theft. Someone can actually impersonate us already. Or worse, someone can target us. Alam kung saan tayo nagtatrabaho, alam kung saan tayo nag-aaral. Alam yung mga allergies natin kasi medical records. Nakakuha ng mga government-issued IDs natin. So, again, impersonation is also one crime against an individual that can happen. If sensitive personal information, yun nawala or yun na-disclose. So, kaya medyo dinilinate ng batas yung personal information and sensitive personal information. And of course, merong penalties regarding these two pag yan yun ang mga wala. Now, when it comes to accountability of organizations, when protecting data subject information, the responsibility falls on us, tayo sa ating companies, sa ating organizations, to the people controlling or the custodians of the information. We need to remember that personal data submitted to us by individuals, we are only the controller. We are just the custodians. We are not the owners of these submitted documents. Okay? It's an old sentiment na pag sinabmit sa atin yung document, tayo na may-ari ng document. Surprisingly, there are still some companies we're consulting for now na yun yung sinasabi sa kanila. And unfortunately, yun din yung payo sa kanila ng ibang lawyers nila na, sa inyo na yan, kayo na may-ari niyan. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The personal information in those documents still belong to the owners, the data subjects themselves. So that's what we want to mention. So we're just the controllers, the processors, or the custodians of these data. And pag binigay natin yan, didisclose natin yan to external partners, diba? Providers of systems, of services in the realm of HR. Ganun din. Sila yung processor natin, tayo yung controller, but they're still not the owners. And of course, like I said, accountability, diba? Data protection regulations demands internal accountability from organizations. From, kunyari, tayo sa HR, the HR function, profession, it demands accountability from us when we collect personal information of employees, applicants, former employees. So, as organizations, as processors, controllers of these personal data, sensitive personal data, we need to have comprehensive records of data processing and, of course, implement security measures to protect them. That's what is being espoused, being required, demanded by data protection regulations. Hindi lang yung atin, marami data protection regulations around the world already. So it begs the question, tayo ba sa mga organizations natin, do we collect only Filipino citizens? What if we also collect information of individuals from other countries, other citizenships? We may need to review ano ba yung mga data protection regulations nila. Kasi meron sa Japan, sa Australia, sa Korea, sa China, EU, sa States, diba? Meron Singapore, marami na hindi lang tayo. So we may need to review ano ba yung mga yung data protection regulations ng mga other countries whom their citizens we also collect personal data of. Marami kasi sa Pilipinas na companies na cater to other nationalities or mga companies na whose parent company, mother company are actually from other diba? Other nations. So, when it comes to accountability, yan yung kailangan natin bibigyan. It demands internal accountability from all of us that process personal data. So when protecting, diba, personal information, sabi natin earlier, what Hossein and LHPH always continuously mention and espouse, it takes the entire organization to comply with data protection regulations. Sabi nga, in an old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. To comply with data protection regulations, it takes the entire organization. Hindi pwedeng si DPO lang. Often, ang sabihin ng mga executives, presidents of companies whom I met, sabi nila, hindi, kaya nga ako nag-appoint yung DPO para siya na bahala. Siya na mag-champion. So, siya na makukulong, siya lang yung lahat. That's a good example of a wrong understanding of the DPA kasi it takes the entire organization. When complying with data privacy, data protection regulation, it takes a top to bottom approach. Kailangan may management buy-in. So the president and the head of organization needs to be involved. Then there's the DPO, Data Protection Officer. Siya yung nagcha-champion ng compliance program in the company. The DPO ensures that the company is compliant. Yun yung kanyang responsibility and accountability. Often, pag the DPO acts alone, walang compliance team, walang support from his or her peers, walang support from top management or from the entire organization. Often, I've met several DPOs already who did this. They resign from the post. They leave the post of the DPO. Kasi wala man akong support. Mahirap siya. It takes too much time from me. So, yan yung gusto nating intindihin. Diba? Na pag mag-isa si DPO, hindi niya kakayanin. Some companies appoint several DPOs. Meron ko DPO, may team of DPOs. But obviously, pagdating sa NPC, registration ng company and a DPO, isa lang. But internally, they can actually have a team of DPOs. There's one company, yung executive management team nila, yun yung DPO. And of course, like I said, there's a compliance team helping the DPO. So, compliance team often is made up of the department heads, representatives from the departments. Kasi syempre, pag si DPO lang mag-isa, wala siyang visibility dun sa processes na ginagawa ng mga departments. Lalo na kung yung organization natin is a type of organization that has 18 to 20 sections, departments. Diba? So if a DPO is one of those departments, ano yung capability to actually oversee everyone? So that's why we need a team. And pag merong breach na nangyari or incident na encounter, often yung tao would easily approach their manager or their team lead or their head. And then yung head, team lead na yan, or compliance team member will be able to inform DPO. And si DPO naman would be then able to investigate, do proper breach management. Yeah. So yung dalawa sa baba, yung PIC tsaka PIP, Personal Information Controllers and Processors, these are external partners, service providers to our companies, whom we share or get information from. Pag sinabing PIC, we share personal information to these external partners, and they have their own purpose. They have their own purpose for the information that they're collecting. Pag sinabi natin PIP, we just outsource to them a certain process that we have, and wala silang sariling purpose nila. So pagdating sa HR function, it begs the question, ano ba yung mga pwede nating i-outsource sa mga service providers? Siguro payroll computation, I guess. Other companies get consultants for their HR functions. Hindi man buo, pero a majority of the HR role, naka-outsource sa consultant. There are other companies naman ay na-outsource yung buong HR function. Yung buong HR department, naka-outsource. Yung buong corporate resources. So pwede naman. But we need to have proper security measures in place. Now, ano yung mga security measures na yun? We'll dive right into those later. So, for now, like you said, if we have these external partners, providers, whom we share personal data with or get personal data from, so sila yung mga PIC and PIP na sinabi natin. And, now, ito. So, pagdating sa penalties, violations of the law or breaches na nangyari, incidents, ultimately, the accountability falls on the head of the organization. So, ibabalik ko lang doon. So, the DPO is accountable if the DPO does not necessarily perform his or her function. Right? Yun yung liability or responsibility ni DPO. Pero pag si DPO perform due diligence, provide recommendations on how the company can actually comply, but top management decline or disapprove these security measures, kailangan lang i-document ng DPO yan. And pag nagkaroon ng breach, it's the head of the organization that needs to explain to NPC. Bakit di nyo in-implement? Alam pa lang may ganitong risks. So, yan yung kailangan intindihin. So, when it comes to penalties, so ano ba yung mga penalties? Unauthorized processing. We process personal data nang wala tayong consent. So, importante na siya ngayon. Di ba? Getting the permission of individuals before we collect personal information. Before we collect personal information. Di ba? So, unauthorized access. Meron nagkaroon ng unauthorized access information natin. So, it begs the question, doon sa tanong kanina, doon sa padlet na ganoon tayo, when we store personal data electronically and even physically in cabinets or in cloud storages, in HR information systems, sino ba may access dyan? Are we continuously monitoring the access to these mediums to where we store personal data of our employees? In proper disposal, how do we dispose information? Siguro by now, dapat hindi na natin ginagawa na pag nag-print tayo ng document na may personal data, tapos mali yung pagka-print, ginagawang scratch paper lang. Or yung iba nire-recycle. Yung iba kinikilo, binibenta. Diba? So dapat bawal na yun ngayon. Kasi improper disposal siya, especially if it contains personal and even sensitive personal information. Nagkaroon ng breach, hindi natin sinabi. So, concealment ng breach, hindi natin inform yung data subjects or NPC. Merong criteria for mandatory data breach notification, si National Privacy Commission. So, we need to review that. Or of course, disclosure. Diba? Unauthorized or malicious disclosure, may intent to actually disclose personal information na hindi naman dapat. All of these penalties would actually amount to a maximum of 5 million in fines and a maximum of 7 years imprisonment. There are varying degrees of fines and imprisonment based on the type of violation, but yung maximum niya nasa 5 million and 7 years. And yan, fine and imprisonment. Or NPC would just issue a commission order na, tigil nyo na yung process nyo. Cease and desist. Okay? So yan yung mga pwede mangyari sa atin. So kung yung nabalitaan nyo before, yung JollibeeDelivery.com na napahinto ng NPC, way back in siguro late 2018. So huminto yung JollibeeDelivery.com. Ngayon up na sila ulit. Siguro it took roughly Jollibee parang 1 to 1.5 years to fully restore the service. So, yan, pwede kasing ganun eh. Or yung, marami nang na-issue si NPC ng cease and desist orders na pinapahinto nila yung processing ng personal information. So, yung mga lending apps, siguro yung mga, I believe you've heard of that, yung mga mobile applications where you can borrow money from, pero pag hindi ka nagbayad, ano nangyari? They actually threaten you, they actually threaten your friends, they access your contact list, di ba? So, meron kasing ganun eh. So, pinahinto na rin ng NPC yan. So, yan yung mga pwedeng mangyari with the penalties. Now, going beyond penalties of breaches, ito yung gusto natin idagdag. NPC recently, netong end of May, during the National Privacy Commission Privacy Awareness Week here in 2020, nag-release sila ng kailang finalized draft on admin fines. When I say admin fines, kahit wala tayong breach, but we did not follow the provisions of the DPA, its implementing rules and regulations, circulars, advisories. Ito yung mga pwede. So yung tier 1 nila, nakalagay dyan 1% to 5%. It's 1% to 5% of the annual gross income of the company, of the organization. So if we violated the principles of the DPA, later, explain natin ano ba yung mga principles of DPA. Failure to comply with the conditions of getting consent. Hindi natin nakuha yung consent from the individuals before we processed, before we collected the personal information. And we violated the rights of the data subjects. Marami kasing rights eh. Later, we'll be discussing that. So 1% to 5% of the annual gross income of the company. Yung tier 2, it's 0.5% to 3%. So failure to implement data protection measures. Ano ba yung mga security measures like we mentioned earlier that we need to implement to protect personal data of our employees, especially in HR. And failure to ensure that third parties, external partners, service providers, to implement their own security measures. We need to ensure na sila rin kasi dapat compliant. Kasi ganun yun eh. Kasi pag we share information to them, controller tayo, either controller din sila, data controller din sila, or processor din sila, or processor sila, we need to ensure na, kailangan compliant din sila. Accountability still falls on us. Kasi tayo yung nag-collect from data subject, we just shared it to them, to our external partners, third parties, kailangan mention natin, hindi, kailangan compliant din kayo. Kasi pag hindi, tatamaan tayo ng penalty na to, 0.5% to 3%. Tier 3 is just failure to register tayo, the company, the personal information controller, and our data processing systems. Now, hopefully for everyone here in our info session now, we've heard already of the registration requirements of the NPC, of the DPA. Na kailangan register natin yung companies natin and our appointed data protection officers. However, that's only phase 1 of the registration. Phase 2 of the registration includes the registration of our data processing systems. So ano ba yung data processing systems? Data processing systems are all of our processes, procedures, activities that involve personal data. Later, towards our third agenda, in takeaway points natin, we'll explain ano ba yung mga data processing systems natin, what constitute a data processing system, and how do we start registering, or how do we start building the inventory of these DPS. Diba? Kasi pag hindi, yun, up to less than 100,000 yung ating pwedeng penalty for that. And lastly, up to 50,000 yung penalty if we fail to comply to any order issued by the National Privacy Commission. When they say issue, sinabihan tayo ng NPC, mag-submit kayo ng PIA document nyo, PIA report. Mag-submit kayo ng privacy manual, mag-submit kayo ng consent, privacy notice na meron tayo. So, yan yung kailangan. Kasi when NPC can do that, NPC can request for document submission. Compliance sweep. They will actually check kung nagko-comply tayo with all the items, the 32 items in the 10-point compliance, accountability, and compliance framework ng NPC. So yan yung mga yan yung mga sinasabi nila. Uy, gawin nyo to, pakisubmit. So we know that you're complying. You know that you're doing all of these. So if we fail to conduct, accomplish, perform the compliance activities as required by the DPA, at pag kumatok sa NPC sa atin, humingi ng PIA report natin, wala, ano sasabihin natin? So yan yung mga kailangan gawin. I see that there are some questions dun sa chat natin. Para lang in-acknowledge natin na meron, we'll go through them later dun sa Q&A portion ng ating recap. Okay? So hindi ko ini-ignore. Babalikan natin sila. So mukhang maraming mga questions eh. Good. Thank you for those messaging your questions. Thank you for participating on that. So we'll go through them later. So I do hope as we go through our recap, we were able to answer some of the problems that sinulat natin in the padlet earlier, problems with data privacy. So ito yung sa fines pa lang. Now, moving on. So sino ba yung subjected to mandatory registration? So yeah, according to Circular 7001, Section 5 ng DPA. If we have sa company natin, we're employing at least 250 employees or we're processing at least 1,000 individuals, we need to register with the NPC. Okay, for those of us here in the info session and for those of us watching in our social media platforms, kung hindi pa tayo registered and we fall in this category, in this criteria, 250 employees or processing at least 1,000 individuals, then we need to register with the NPC. Kunyari, there are some companies sabihin na, hindi, ano lang kami, less than 20. However, they process more than 1,000 individuals per month. Case in point, an example of those would be mining companies or yung mga others naman, yung mga manufacturing companies or mining companies who hire contractual people. So hindi sila regular employees. So yung mga regular employees nila, less than 100. Pero yung the people that they hire contractually, lumalagpas kasi parang every month 1,000 ng 1,000. Hindi kailangan talaga mag-register with the NPC. Kasi if you're going to look at historically, ilan na yung information na meron tayo. Pero kung 1,000 per month and we've been operating for 5 years, so that's 1,000 times 20 times 12 times 5. Marami na, lagpas na yun sa requirement ng NPC. Or we fall under these sectors. So, government agencies, financial institutions, telco, BPOs, higher education institutions, training centers, hospitals or medical professions, insurance providers, direct marketing, pharma, or we are yung BIP or personal information processor. We are, as a company, provide services by other companies outsourcing their processes to us. Yeah, so if we're those, kailangan natin mag-comply, kailangan natin mag-register. So, sige nga po, if I may, pwede bang show of hands, sino na yung nakapag-register sa NPC? You can either use, react na thumbs up or any other reaction that you have. Kung alam nyo na nag-register na yung company nyo, di ba? Or kung kayo mismo yung DPO, good. Yes, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Sino ba? Meron ba? Hala, sa ating 80 or so participants, isa lang yung nakita kong nagtaas na kamay na nag-register na sila. So yung iba, I do hope registered kayo. If not, we do hope that either you know that you need to register. Thank you, sir. Yan, meron din nagtaas ng kamay. How to check if company is registered? Good question. Mangyari dyan, the first thing you need to know is, may DPO ba tayo? Kung meron tayong DPO, the next natin would be, is tanong si DPO mismo, registered ka ba? Kasi pag si DPO mismo hindi niya alam kung registered siya hindi, then chance are hindi tayo registered. Yon. Then ma'am, to quickly answer, kasi nandun tayo sa slide na to, we need to register our DPO. Especially kung pasok tayo sa criteria natin dito. Again, for some of the questions, we'll go through them later in our Q&A portion. Just keep your questions coming. We'll go through them later. Thank you for those messaging or writing your questions in our chat box. For those watching in our social media platforms, kung meron kayong tanong, message nyo lang dyan. Ilalagay ng mga partners natin sa LIHPH dito sa chat natin. Kasi currently, I don't have access to the social media platforms. Tsaka meron kong access doon, diba? So, lagay mo na lang. Thank you. For those who reacted sa tanong ko na, nag-register ba tayo? Thank you. For those na hindi, again, let's review. Let's re-evaluate kung kailangan ba natin mag-register. Pasok ba tayo sa requirements na to? Kung hindi man natin kailangan mag-register, our next question is, meron ba tayong appointed na DPO? Kasi yun, kailangan din natin maintindihan. Wait lang po. Nagulo ko yung aking Zoom. Ayan. So, what are the risks for not complying? Often, sabihin natin yung penalties kanina, yung admin fines na meron tayo dyan. Kulong multa, yan yung often that we will hear. So, ang gusto natin mag-focus on, we want to focus on these, yung operational disruptions. How does it impact our operations if we actually don't comply and we encounter a breach? And this happens. When a company encounters a breach, what do they normally do? They do an admin hearing, they do interviews with the people involved around the incident. So we need to practice breach containment, breach management. So that takes time away from our daily operations, especially now in the pandemic where everyone is trying to streamline their operations, do more with the limited time that we have with all of these community quarantines and lockdowns, especially kung nasa work from home tayo, mas mahirap din yung ating situation. Now, how do we still provide siguro 6 to 8 hours of work in a relatively non-professional environment? Kasi bahay, di ba? Kusina, sala, kwarto. Diba? So, how can we still be producing yung amount of work that we need to be producing on a daily basis? Tapos pag meron pa tayong breach na encounter, yun, that adds time, or that takes away time from us from doing our work kasi we need to actually investigate and write our incident reports. And if it, like I said, falls under the mandatory, the criteria for mandatory breach notification, we need to inform NPC and the daily subject. So what else are the operational disruptions? Extortion, business email compromise. Aside from yung penalties ng batas, business email compromise would be, we get emails from people who would say that they are our suppliers, or would say that they are partners. It turns out that they're not, and we blindly trust their emails, and ultimately we pay whatever amount to these hackers, these impersonators. There are some victims already that we know of, we've spoken to already in the Philippines. There is a manufacturing company in Novaliches, and they paid around 80,000 pesos to the wrong supplier. There is a mining company in Manila, paid $30,000 to the wrong supplier again. The worst incident I've heard about, that we've heard about in Cosén, is the company paid around $250,000 US dollars to the wrong people because their email was actually compromised already. Nahack na email nila, ginamit yung email nila to send out fake emails, fake collection invoices to their principals. Ayun, so nagbayad yung principals nila ng around $250,000 to the wrong people. So, tumataas na uli ang dollar ngayon, nagpas 50 na ulit. Dati nag 47, 48. So, $250,000 is how much in pesos? So, yan. These are the things that we need to understand as well when we don't comply with data protection regulations. It's a risk for non-compliance. And of course, negative impact to our reputation. At the end of the day, it's the image of the company. Especially now, with the pandemic, we don't want to lose our reputation, our images. Kasi mahirap na nga mag-contact ng business now. What else kung yung reputation natin natamaan pa because of these breaches. Loss of client trust, partner trust, and we need to inform affected individuals, data subjects, and the National Privacy Commission because of them. When we encounter incidents, kung part siya naman door breach notification, kailangan natin sabihan. So yan siya. Clear? So when thinking of not complying to data protection regulations, it's a good practice to go beyond looking at the penalties, but look at operational disruptions and impact to our business. Kasi kunyari, for HR, if there's an employee who does not have the company's image, company's reputation top of mind, it begs the question, bakit pa sila nasa ating company? Why are they still employed? So these are the things that we need to understand. Clear? So merong levels of organizational compliance. Diba? So there are those companies who know that there's a law, there's a DPA, ganyan. However, they still choose not to comply. I've met some of them already. And ayaw namin, hindi kami tatamaan yan. We're immune. And so, ibig sabihin, paano nila nasabing immune sila? So there are those companies that doesn't know about the DPA. Now, after attending awareness sessions, info sessions, now they know, and they choose not to comply. They fall back to willful non-compliance. And of course, there are most companies fall short of their compliance. They end up with paper compliance. They register their DPO. They have privacy notices. However, they just copied it from other companies belonging to similar sector. They copied consent forms. They have privacy manuals with motherhood statements that does not necessarily include specific security measures that they need to implement. They fall short. Paper compliance lang siya. However, the requirements of data protection regulations is actually operational compliance. It's implementing the security measures that we set out to do. So that's a requirement, especially for our DPA. Kasi NPC, the National Privacy Commission would normally, when they do compliance audit, would normally ask, ano yung evidences mo of compliance? If you conducted awareness sessions, ano yung evidence mo? So ano yung picture siguro? Sino ba yung nag-attend yan? If you're saying you have security measures, sige, nasa yung actual security measures that you're doing. So hindi lang siya papel. Okay? Hindi lang siya, we stick with work manuals, operation manuals, especially for companies who strictly follow ISO standards na dapat meron tayong operation manual, ganyan. However, pag tinanong natin yung mga employees nila, hindi naman din sinusunod yung mga work manuals. So that's paper compliance. Ayaw natin yun. Okay? At the end of the day, we need to check day in, day out, monitor if our security measures are being implemented. Do our employees, and in the HR perspective, do our employees still know what to do when they encounter incidents? Do they still know how to protect personal information? We normally get to ask companies, how often do you do fire drills or earthquake drills? Sige nga po, quick question lang. If you can answer dun sa chat natin, how often do you do fire drills or earthquake drills? Kasi in my experience, from my knowledge, ang ginagawa ng most companies, they conduct that once a year. Merong iba, they conduct it twice. Merong iba, thrice a year. Good job for them. But for those companies who conduct it once a year or sometimes hindi pa nga regular, when an actual earthquake or fire does struck, do our employees still know what to do? Wag na itong pandemic, itong nagdaang earthquake. Noong 2019 na lang, around June, July, na yung epicenter was around in Zambales. What happened during that time? I was in a building in QC, na 12th floor. During the earthquake, people were still conducting meetings, typing in computers, not necessarily doing the things they need to do when an earthquake strikes. So it begs a question. When we do encounter security incidents or data breaches, do our people know what to do? Do our employees know how to protect personal information? Why they need to protect personal information? And I strongly believe that falls in the responsibility of the DPO and HR kasi employees yung tatamaan. So that's what we want to understand. That's what we want to continuously practice. So operationalizing the compliance. So that's what we want to aim for, not just paper compliance. So let's move beyond. Let's go past paper compliance. Ayaw natin doon. So that's what Costain and LIHP espouses. Go beyond paper compliance. So we need to operationalize it. We need to perform it in our day-to-day functions, especially now with work from home or remote work arrangements. How can we, like I said, tanong kanina, di ba? How can we monitor? Ano ba yung pwede natin ilagay? Ano ba yung security measures meron dapat tayo to protect the personal information being accessed by our employees remotely? Yan. With that, ito yung question and answer natin. So if you have questions, you may type them. So let's just go through some of the questions that were initially asked. Charm?
Sir, would you like me to read? Ang gagawin ko po, I'm going to choose the questions that are in line with the DPA awareness muna. So the first question, yes. So the first question is, by professing our names and the companies we work for here, does it fall under DPA? Does it not fall under DPA? Or yes, does it fall or does it not?
Yun. So, ang mayari dyan, yung registration natin, diba? When we registered our participation to this info session, meron dun yung consent. Diba? We ask na, uy, pakilagay yung pangalan nyo, yung companies natin. Kasi part naman siya nung hiningi natin consent during the registration pa lang. So if the question is, does it fall on DPA? Yes. But we did have a consent form for that. Na, we collected your information, so ganito siya. So it's for this purpose, for this info session. So yes, it does. So if you're, tas tayo naman, for your own companies, you're going to conduct online webinars, meetings, trainings, ganun din, ganun din. So, kasi kanina, di ba, tinanong na that the entire info session will be recorded, ganyan. So, merong question out kung okay lang ba sa'yo, kung okay lang, please stay on this entire info session. Kung hindi, you may leave. Ganun naman eh. And if you're going to notice, for other, yung mga online, yung mga delivery, tatawag ka, so, hihingi sila information. So, yun doon na rin yung consent nila eh, na kung gusto mo na pupayag ka, kunin information mo, name, contact information, address, please stay on the line. Kung ayaw mo, baba mo na lang. Kasi being recorded yung ano eh, yung buong conversation. Same with us. So, yun siya. So, yes ang sagot. And we do have a security measure for that. And your recommendation namin, if you're going to conduct such recording sessions as well in your respective companies, ganun din. Inform them na we're doing this, collecting information for this purpose, and it's part of DPA. Yeah. So I do hope that's clear. Charm?
Okay. Second is a verbal disclosure of personal data covered under this law?
Verbal disclosure of
Verbal
personal
disclosure
data.
of personal data. Yes.
Like I said, when collecting personal information, according to DPA, kailangan ng consent. Consent needs to be documented. So it's either a recorded conversation, siyempre dapat may consent din yung tao, or a document na pinirmahan, basta recorded siya, basta documented siya, that we have proof na, kinuha namin yung consent mo, pumayag ka, so yun siya. Pag verbal lang, tas walang any form of documentation, hindi siya, bawal siya, hindi siya consent. So,
Hindi yung verbal if
ko,
sir, na if recorded. Kasi lumalabas verbal, but it's going to be recorded. So, naging electronic form na din siya.
yes.
Pero
So,
kung verbal
basta recorded na consent, yun yung sasabi natin. Sige. Thank you. Char?
Ready? Okay. So, siguro sasabi ko na lang yung isang question kasi related siya sa consent para connect na din. Is there such a thing as an implied consent in DPA?
Yun. Sige. Good question on that. Sino nagsabi nun? Hindi ko nabasa kung saan yung
Isoroko.
Yun. Thank you, ma'am. So, yes. Sorry, hindi pala yes. No, implied consent does not actually constitute consent. Kailangan explicitly binigay yung approval, yung permission to process personal information. Kaya, if you will notice, when NPC does its check online ng mga privacy notices, consent forms, ganyan, kailangan explicitly sinasabi doon na we're getting you or you're getting this information, name, contact information, address, ganyan, for these specific purposes, and we have these specific uses, we will share to these specific people, ito yung mga security measures na meron tayo, these are your rights under the DPA, and this is the contact information of the DPO. Basically, yun yung consent. Yung sinabi naming run through ngayon, that's the content of consent. You may need to go through yung mga guidelines and templates ni NPC to see specifically ano ba talaga dapat naman ng consent. But what I said earlier, yun yung dapat meron tayo. At least meron tayo dapat nun. So, hindi pwedeng implied. Kailangan explicit na binigay yung consent and recorded, documented. Charm? Nakamute ka, Charm?
Very good. Thank you. So, sama ko na rin po yung isang question also regarding to consent para sabay-sabay. Since DPA requires the free and informed consent of the individual from whom personal data is collected, is it safe to assume that consent should be time-bound?
Consent is time-bound. Yun. Walang perpetual consent din. Wala rin. Unless the processing of personal information now falls under a contractual obligation. Na, syempre, time-bound din naman. Kunyari, employment contract. Hindi naman siya perpetual din. Diba? Or the processing of personal information falls under compliance to a law. So, yun. So, consent, yun yung least of the three na binanggit natin, consent, contractual obligation, or compliance to law, consent yung pinakamababaw and kailangan time-bound siya. Na we need to get again the consent. Pag natapos yung validity ng consent, we now have to dispose of the personal information in the scope of that consent. If we're still going to retain information, then dapat anonymize na siya beyond the validity of the consent. Charm?
Another about, medyo ano yung consent natin Can consent be done through email?
Yun, pwede. Kasi documented siya. Kailangan lang specific. Kailangan lang na explicitly binabanggit doon ng tao nagbigay ng information na, I'm permitting the processing of my personal data that I submitted. Yes. Pwede through email kasi it's documented. Then you can print the email, save it as PDF, para meron tayong documentation. Pwede naman.
Another is, can the consent be recorded? Say, for example, when facilitating an admin hearing, is it considered complying to a DPA na?
Kung recorded yung, kunyari, admin hearing na online, like what we're doing now, kailangan lang inform yung tao. Kailangan lang inform yung mga tao na doon present in that online hearing or in this case, info session, meeting, virtual. Kailangan lang inform sila na, we will be recording. Kung okay lang sa inyo, stay. Kung hindi, then you may leave. Yeah.
Still of consent, what is the ruling in case of incapacity of individual? Example, if employee is hospitalized and unconscious.
Yan, good question. So, pagdating sa ospital at incapacitate yung tao na hindi man siya makapagbigay consent, di ba? Ang lang nasa ER, could you consent? And hindi na ganun. Na-forgo si consent if yung may mga lawful processing, lawful basis for processing personal data. Consent is one of them. Pero kung medical reason or life and death situation, hindi kailangan yung consent. So, para mas malinawan tayo, for us to have a clearer understanding of that, you may want to understand or read through yung DPA. Ang mas maganda basahin yung toolkit ng Data Privacy Act. Hanapin natin doon yung lawful basis for processing personal information. Nandun kasi yung sa national security, health or life and death situation. In this case, yung pandemic, that's also one of them. Yan yung mga hindi na kailangan ng consent. So, or contractual obligation, like I mentioned, compliance to law. Yeah. So, yan yung mga bagay na hindi necessarily kailangan ng consent. Lalo na kung life or death yung pinag-uusapan.
Okay. So let's jump back to questions regarding the DPA itself. Will we be cited by DOLE if the company is not yet registered?
Yan. Sige. With that, I shall pivot the question to our expert in DOLE matters. So Ray.
For DOLE, DOLE is different from data privacy.
Data privacy.
You need to register sa DOLE, and you also need to register dun sa Data Privacy Commission. So meron kayong dapat dalawang NTC?
National Privacy.
National Privacy.
National Privacy Commission. So magkaiba yung registration ng DOLE pati NPC. So if labor matters, lahat ng workplaces kailangan mag-register sa DOLE. Tapos lahat din ng companies kailangan mag-register sa NPC. So dalawang registration siya, medyo mahirap. So hindi automatic yung DOLE. Once na nag-register na kayo sa DOLE, registered na kayo dun sa NPC. Hindi po siya automatic. And another thing, just to share with you, regarding doon naman sa labor inspection, 'di ba? Sinasabi niyo minsan na okay, hindi namin pwedeng ipakita yung record sa labor inspector kasi data privacy siya. Specifically doon sa payrolls kasi yan lagi sinasabi ng mga companies, huwag niyo pong gagawin yun. if yung labor inspector ng DOLE ay hiningi yung documents nyo for inspection processes, ibigay nyo po at ipakita nyo. Hindi nyo po pwedeng isabihin or isite na may data privacy tayo. Bakit? Kasi mandated sila ng government to inspect or check yung records nyo kung nagko-comply talaga kayo doon sa government regulation. So, huwag nyo pong idadahilan lagi yung data privacy para sabihin na hindi nyo ipapakita yung mga documents nyo during the inspection. So, ayun po.
To support what Sir Ray mentioned regarding yung mga inspectors, compliance tolo yun eh. So we don't need to get the consent of our employees when we need to submit such documents to government inspectors. Kasi compliance tolo yun. Yeah, para clear. Kasi like I said, diba, consent is the lowest form. Yung sunod dyan, right above that is contractual obligation. And the highest of that is yung compliance tolo. So if it's a mandate by the law, then we have to. Similar dyan yung pag-disclose ng health information sa mga government agencies, sa mga health institutions nitong pandemic. May batas na about that. Na kailangan i-disclose yung information, hindi ka pwede magtago. Kasi ano ba yung purpose? To monitor, control, manage yung mga rising pandemics. Thank you for your questions. Charm, meron ba?
Are there any differences in implementing DPA in private and government sectors?
Wala naman. Actually, yung nilagay na regulations ng NPC on the DPA for the public sector and private sector, pareho siya. hindi siya nagkakalayo.
There are other questions here na medyo related to HR na. Would you like it to
baka
be
doon na sa baba.
later na lang po, di ba? Okay.
Sa data privacy risk in HR.
All right. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Charm. Thank you, Sir Ray. So, like what Charm mentioned, yung mga questions natin dito na medyo specific na sa HR, we'll go through that later. Dun sa second agenda natin, yung risks, data privacy risk in HR. So, thank you for your questions on the DPA recap. I guess for those who did not ask your questions, we do hope you were able to still understand and follow yung discussions natin sa ano ba yung mga kailangan gawin. Yan. So, again, if you have additional questions later about the DPA recap na hindi nyo natanong kanina, tanong nyo lang ulit mamaya. Then we'll have another run-through of our Q&A. Clear? Thank you everyone. So we shall continue. Sige. Before we continue, wala na pala yung questions. Kami may question. Sige. Ano lang, quick. These are just parang 6, 7 items. You can freely answer by typing your answers in the chat box. Okay? Para lang para lang to break the monotony of our discussion. Para it becomes a dialogue, it becomes a conversation between us and kayo, yung participants natin. So, yan. So, ano yung word na tinutukoy natin dyan? It's a jumbled word. So, medyo madali isulat yan. Medyo madali sagutan yan. Thank you. Yes. It's data privacy. Yes. There are only a few ways that we can actually jumble the word data. Kasi 4 letters lang talaga sila. So, wala tayong magagawa. It's data privacy. Thank you for those who answered. What's this? Yan. Ito medyo mahaba. Sino yung unang makakasulat? Yon, thank you, ma'am. Yes, it is. It is personal information. Yes. Thank you. Yan. Medyo, at least naalala natin, di ba? May DPA, data privacy, may personal information. So, kumbaga, at the very least, yung objective natin today is kahit pa paano masabi natin na, narinig ko na yung data privacy, so meron akong alam about it. Diba? We may not be masters of data privacy or experts of data privacy at the end of this 3-hour session, pero at least we can easily say, hindi, narinig ko na yan, nangyari na yan, or na-explain na yan sa akin. Yan na yan. Sige. Like I said, we can only jumble the word data. Very, very few. Thank you. Officer. Yan, naman. It's Data Protection Officer. Yes. Okay. Data Protection Officer. Now, to be clear, often kasi si DPO ang nagiging misconception sa kanya is a data privacy officer. Actually, it's not. It's a data protection officer. Okay? Yun yung DPO natin. Yun yung tawag sa DPO. Data protection officer. Thank you for those who answered. And, ano to? Yes, thank you. It's the data subject. So ito yung mga individuals whom we process, we use, collect, disclose, store information of. Data subjects, the individuals, our employees, our applicants, former employees, management, stockholders, shareholders, external partners. Yan. If you have other individuals that you collect personal information of, yan, data subject din sila. Okay? Clients even, customers ng clients, those are also the subjects kung service provider tayo. Yan, thank you. Ito, yeah, well, nasa slide actually, yung sagot. Hussein, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Yes. It's us. Yes, it's Hussein. Yes. Thank you. Sinabi ko na yung sagot nung unang salta. Unang nag-chat. Thank you. And lastly, again, yung answer, yes, nasa slide. Mas mahaba lang siya dun sa Hussein kasi Hussein is one word. Kung kita niyo yung mouse ko, ito yung sagot. Yes, it's Learning Innovation Hub. Thank you, ma'am. Like I said, nasa slide yung sagot. Nasa upper right lang naman.
Saka yung hub hindi na ano.
Hindi ko yun na hub. It's 3 letters. Ano pa ba pwede natin i-jumble sa hub? Medyo, hub na lang. Sige. Thank you for participating in our quick ano lang. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. At least, we know that everyone is participating. Yeah, next is data privacy risk in HR. So we collected challenges, issues, questions that we have encountered already through the course of our consultancy engagements with companies. We spoke to their HR personnel, HR managers, HR heads. Ito yung normally narinig natin na questions, risks on data privacy regarding the HR profession or the HR function. Okay, so we want to dive into this. However, before we dive into this, we would like to know your HR-specific data privacy concerns and issues. Diba? So we would like you, Surrey, to jump again into our Padlet. Si Surrey will be posting the link to our chat. Yeah. Sige, mag-stop muna ako, sorry, pa-share na lang nung Yan, sakto. So the question is, what do you think from our discussion on the recap are the data privacy issues in HR? Kanina kasi your first Padlet question natin was, what are your data privacy concerns in your company, diba? In general. Now, it's HR specific sa HR profession natin. So what is it yung question natin, problem natin for this one? HR specific to your function. Yan, mukhang may nagsusulat kasi may gumagalaw na 3 dots sa taas. How do we apply privacy for employees during work from home arrangements? So that's good question. So paano nga ba natin i-apply yung data privacy for work from home arrangements natin? Tinanong, similar yung tanong na doon sa kanina na paano nga ba pag ngayong remote work from home arrangements, paano nga ba natin gagawin siya? We have a discussion later on the data drives risk in HR, so second gen that discusses that. So I'll pack that question, so we'll get to answer that as well. Safekeeping HR related information, especially when we are newly installed. When you are newly installed DPO and HR admin manager to the long-standing company. Good question. So ang pwede nating sagot dyan would be kung bagong DPO tayo, di ba? Kung newly hired DPO or newly hired HR or admin manager. What do? The first thing we need to do is to do a catch up, di ba? Ano namang meron yung company na yun? Kasi malamang kung long-standing company sila, they already have certain policies in place, security measures in place. So it begs the question, so what are those? Nasa ganun, tayo as a DPO or the HR admin, we know what else to actually implement. What to implement, what to continue, what to improve, and what to add sa ating policies ng company. So yun, that's immediately the first thing that we would like to recommend para sa newly appointed DPOs. Data retrieval and retention of employee data. Good question. So how long should employee data be retained? And how should it be disposed? Later, we'll have a slide. We'll be discussing that. But to answer it quickly, syempre, while the person is employed by a company, we will be retaining the information. However, pag hindi na sila connected sa company natin, it begs the question, how long should we retain the information? So it depends on the purpose that we have. How long do we intend to use the information of former employees? Walang specific na retention period sinasabi si DPA. Ang sinasabi niya, if we no longer need the information, then we need to dispose of it. Kasi it begs the question, if we no longer need it, why are we still retaining it? So that's what we want to understand. So if we have certain or specific purposes for retaining that wealth of information about a former employee, then sige, walang problema, as long as it's declared. But if we no longer need to retain all of those information, kunyari, information about siblings, dependents, parents, diba? Former employers, kasi yung kinukuha natin from our employees during application. So when they leave, do we still need to retain them? Birthdays. Will we still greet them during their birthdays? I guess hindi na. So we need to dispose of those. Yung mga transfer of records, government IDs. So these are the things that we need to review and see if we still need them. Then sige. Pero if you don't, then it's a good practice to. It's actually recommended, even if not required. It's actually required to dispose of them already. How do you apply? Wala yung binabasa ko. See, data privacy for CCTV in our offices. So, to share, NPC actually published, charm advisory yun, di ba? Advisory yung sa CCTV. Tama. Naka-mute ka. So, sige.
Yes. Advisory. 2020-04.
Yun. So may advisory si NPC regarding CCTVs. So all of us, especially for the companies that implement CCTVs, might want to review that. Kasi na doon nakalagay kung anong gagawin natin. Does the subject, employee, have the right to reject on disclosing personal information? Sige. It depends on the purpose. It depends kung kanino siya disclose. To quickly answer that, if the disclosure is not necessarily part of his employment, his or her employment in the company, then pwede niya siguro i-decline yung disclosure. But if the disclosure is part of the process being performed by the company with all its employee data, then kailangan siya magbayad. So it can be in the employment contract. That's one. So, kunyari, yung pag-process ng payroll ay outsourced. So, pag tumanggi siya doon, wala siyang pera, wala siyang sweldo. So, mali naman. But, how do we inform the employee? Pangit naman kung consent. Ibig sabihin, kasi kailangan yearly nire-renew. So, better to have that. There's already a recommendation. Better to have that in your employment contracts. Then again, it's more general approach to that is, ano ba yung mga items natin, provisions natin that we did process we do in our company with employee data that needs to be in the employment contract. So kailangan siya tignan, kailangan siya balikan. How can we put parameters on people who can access or work on 201 files? Good. It begs the question, sino ba lang dapat ang may access sa information, especially for employee 201 files? Diba? According sa 10-point compliance program ng framework ng NPC, we need to be able to implement user access control. So ano yun? Ang user access control management, hindi lang siya pang information systems or software applications. It also goes for physical documents being stored. How is data privacy applying in background checking? So when doing background checking, ano ba yung tayo mismo, when tayo HR, when we do background check, we need to understand ano lang ba yung dapat natin kinukuha information. Diba? It boils down to proportionality of the information we're getting, we're collecting. Hindi naman dapat kumukuha tayo ng sobra-sobra information. In terms of company ID issuance, what are personal information we need to include in company ID? Charm, ano yung na-encounter natin regarding company IDs?
Actually, that's a good question. Usually, or previously, most of our company IDs, ang practice kasi dito sa Pilipinas is company IDs is used as parang to open an account, so to speak, or to show your information. However, it was noticed recently na parang ano rin siya, too much information in a way that company IDs are supposedly, di ba lagi siya nakasabit? It's one of the policies din, HR policies now that when you're in the office, dapat nakasabit yung company ID mo. However, if you think about it, kung nakasabit yung company ID mo, and then, for example, you are using public transportation, ang usually na nangyayari is pag umaalis na ng office, nakasabit si ID, kitang-kita ng lahat ng tao yung information na nakalagay sa iyo. O kahit yung employees nyo, ganun din yung nangyayari. But it publicly, nakakaano din na parang, uy, kitang-kita yung pangalan. Pangalan okay pa eh. Minsan may address, may signature, and so on. So, ang nagiging best practice nowadays na ini-implement, napansin ko nagsimula siya sa BPO, pero ini-implement na rin ng mga companies nowadays as minimal information as possible. Kasi the thought process is if you're going to use your ID or company ID to open accounts or other transactional, use your other IDs na lang. Para hindi pag nakasabit, kunyari nakalagay yung name and position and sabihin natin picture, yung iba pa nga wala pang company ID para walang company logo para pag if you misplace you forgot to take it off your ID list na nakasabit sa iyo and you go to the public transportation, maiwasan din yung nakikita masyado yung personal information. And some big companies have yung nagbi-beep para makapasok. So yun na lang yung parang surety na talaga loob ka talaga ng company. So yun.
Yeah, thank you, Charm. So
want to use the same practice as well.
So that's for company ID. So anyway, it boils down to for our company, what's the purpose of putting information there in the company ID? Ano ba yung halaga niyan? Ano ba yung it was an old practice na government issued IDs, yung ID numbers nakalagay sa company ID kasi ginagamit yung company ID sa valid ID. So begs the question, yun ba talaga isa sa mga purposes natin? So that's one way to review the information stored in our company IDs. So as HR, yun yung aalamin natin. Are there certain parameters in exchange of chat history of confidential items? So parameters natin dyan would be for what purpose are we sharing these information, chat history or chat that includes or involves personal data. Ano ba yung dahilan? Bakit natin sinishare? Kung wala naman tayong purpose, then baka malicious disclosure na siya. Chismis. Diba? So, if we have purposes naman, thus we're only sharing what we need to the people that needs to receive the information, then yun siya. Then okay lang. Then it should be a company policy lang. Do we require a DPA statement on all paperwork that we ask our applicants, new hires employees, if we are asking for personally identifiable information? Now, ideally, yes. Okay. Kunyari for applicants, when you're getting information, personal information, sensitive personal information from applicants, we need to have consent. Bakit? Kasi we don't have any contract agreement with them for us to be able to process their personal data. So consent, yung isa dyan, in a privacy statement, normally kasama din. For employees, if we're collecting new information na wala sa nauna natin na collect and it's not part of the employment contract, then that can be. We need to either release a memo that everyone signs, or there's a consent, or it's a new policy in the employment contract or company policy that requires us to get this new information. Then yun siya. Yun naman. So, kailangan lagi may DPA statement. Kailangan lagi may privacy document that supports the collection of the information. So, may it be a company policy, an updated employment contract, a consent form. So, yun siya. I'll get back to the question do sa chat. So now HR received a visitor, employee's wife, allegedly abandoned by the employee. Said wife is asking the whereabouts employee, like, saan na siya nakatira? How do you properly and politely decline the request nila for information? Good question. Sabihin natin data privacy. Hindi. Medyo off yun. Well, I believe the people in the HR profession would be more capable of answering how to politely and diplomatically answer the question. But in terms of the data privacy, kung hindi din naman talaga sinabihan tayo ni applicant, ni employee, the employee did not give consent to give out his or her whereabouts, contact information, then we don't necessarily disclose it to anyone. Unless, of course, if they have legitimate purpose, or in this case, legitimate purpose po yung paghahanap ng asawa. So, kailangan documented legitimate purpose and may consent tayo. This specific example does not only go for HR. Some manning companies actually encounter that problem. Na yung family member, wife, or whatnot, relative looks for gets or tries to solicit, inquire about personal information of their relative, seafarer, seaman, ganyan, sea person. So, hindi dapat siya basta-basta disclose. So, yun yung gusto natin sabihin. Unless, of course, specifically mentioned by the seafarer na, i-disclose mo kung nasan ako. Or kung okay lang sa akin, disclose yan. So, even financial data, kasama yan. Na tipong, kung tatanong, magkano nga ba sweldo nung kapatid ko? Ganyan, parang, bakit mo kailangan malaman? Sino ka ba? So, yun siya. Unless, of course, and ito yung extreme case, unless, of course, yung employee passes away kasi may right ang isang data subject na pag nag-pass away na siya, deceased na siya, yung rights niya transfers to the next of kin. So kasi it's a transmissibility of the rights. So if it's a relative na wala naman siyang sawa na kapatid kunyari, it's pumanaw na yung employee, the relative or in this case yung kapatid or a parent would have rights to the information. Yeah, pwede naman siyang gano'n. So kasi part siya ng na data subject rights. Asking questions connected to an HIV plus employee's rights and benefits, but was not able to block out the name of the info. Should it marry an NTE? Unknowingly na-disclose yung identity ng employee that has a certain health status. Tama? Yun ba yung tanong na yan? I'm guessing that's how I'm understanding this. Then, kailangan mag-explain ng tao na bakit mo nasama. Na kung aksidente yan, hindi kailangan mo kailangan mo mag-thank you kung yan yung sagot doon sa tanong ko kung tama yan, hindi natin. Kailan mag-explain nung taong nagkamali? Na ay, hindi ko alam, yung kamali ako, ganyan. Yes, somehow it's a notice to explain. I encountered a client na halo yung question na nag-disclose siya ng information to a relative, information about one of their customers. So, na hindi naman dapat na-disclose. Nagreklamo yung customer, nagreklamo yung relative. Tapos, si HR, pinag-explain yung employee na nag-disclose. Kasi kailangan malaman part of that investigation. And back then, we were the consultants. And we actually highly recommended the HR na, pag-explaining niyo yung employee. Not really an NTE, kasi minsan yung NTE denotes a certain demerit, diba, for employees. But pinag-explain, written explanation na kailangan pirmado niya, ito yung sinabi niya, ito yung nangyari. So we had them that kasi it's part of the investigation. Paano ba na-disclosing information? So yes, in a manner of speaking, have the employee explain ano ba yung side niya of the incident that happened. Did I miss a question? I think I did. How long we save employee files, work from home? Data storage, validity and expiration, 201 handling. Who should handle and how extensive can she handle? Or C, HRIS, any standards on data safekeeping? Again, ang sasabihin natin dyan would be user access management. Later, we'll be explaining dun sa actually next slide natin. We need to start practicing proper access control, accessibility, diba? On the information that we store. Sino lang ba dapat ni access information? Okay? So, we'll get into that. If you don't have any other questions, at least for your issues in data privacy, okay lang. For some of the questions na sinulat dito sa chat, okay lang, we'll go through them later in the Q&A portion of our second agenda. Okay? Ang dinaanan natin muna yung nasa Padlet natin. Okay po, and that's okay. Sige, so Ray, I'll be sharing again my screen. So yun, thank you for that lively discussion, even though it's not audio, diba? Thank you for that live discussion. At least we now get to understand na ano ba yung concerns natin as HR practitioners, as our participants in this info session. Ano ba yung concerns natin on regarding data privacy in HR, diba? Data privacy risks in HR. For those who wrote their questions in the chat box, we will answer them later in the Q&A portion of our agenda. So when it comes to data privacy risk in HR, there are some things that we need to understand first. We need to understand the tenets of data privacy, the principles of data privacy. Ano ba yung, what is data privacy considering that we need to protect and look out for? So data privacy principles, yung CIA, no, it's not the Central Intelligence Agency, and data subject rights, or the Culinary Institute of America, hindi rin yan. So data privacy principles would be transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So yan, malamang you've heard of that countless of times. If you've read the DPA, you've attended several info sessions already. So gusto natin sabihin, transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionalities. We need to be transparent to the data subjects that you're collecting information from. We need to tell them what are our purposes. So we need to have legitimate purpose for the collection of the information. For what purpose are we going to use them? Are we going to disclose them? Bakit? Para saan? And of course, we need to only collect what we need, proportionality. We don't collect too much information. Tanong kanina, when we started the entire info session regarding background checks, or having an application form answered by an applicant. We need to review those kasi we need to check ano ba yung mga sobrang information na kailangan natin kunin dito. Do we still need to get the salary bracket of the siblings or parents of our applicants? If yes, bakit? Para saan? Ano yung purpose natin for those? Do we need to understand yung family background niya? If yes, again, ano purpose natin para dyan? So, kasi pag hindi, then we might need to reevaluate our collection of information, the information we're collecting. Kasi pa kailangan we implement proportionality. Now, CIA is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So, information that we store needs to be confidential. It needs to be, the data quality should be maintained, sustained, integrity. And of course, it needs to be available to those who process the information, especially to the data subject themselves. So when you say confidentiality, we now need to start practicing the principle of least privilege. Tinanong kanina, who needs to have access to employee 201 information in HRIS, in storage of our employee 201 files. Sinabi natin, we kept mentioning, we need to implement user access controls, and it's part of the 10-point compliance framework and NPC. So we now need to strictly implement, and monitor the principle of least privilege. Sino lang dapat may access information? Sino lang ba dapat? Hindi naman pwedeng lahat. Kung part ng, if it's part of our recruitment process that the information is shared to the hiring department, hiring manager, then sige, walang problema. Pero hanggang kanino lang dapat na-share. Integrity, data, personal data collected should not be changed unless, of course, requested by the individuals, the data owners, data subjects, and of course, availability, as we mentioned. It's available to those people that needs to process the information. In rights of data subject, just to mention three, there's around 8 rights. Data subjects have the right to be informed. We need to inform them of the processing, of the information collecting, of the purpose. Kaya yun yung transparency we mentioned earlier. So data subjects have the right for corrections. If they submit wrong information, they have the right to correct it. And of course, right to damages. If there's an actual breach or incident occurred and they actually garnered physical harm, they were impacted to it physically, then actually they can claim, they have rights to damages. So that's things that we need to understand. There are other rights, part of it, right for erasure, again, right for transmissibility, right to the data access. You can read these rights and yung specific definitions of them in the NPC website or in the DPA toolkit, like I mentioned earlier. That's an easier read than the actual DPA. Kasi the DPA itself is written as a law. So if you want to know more how to specifically comply, the toolkit would be an easier read. Now, having these tenets, principles, CIA, and the subject rights, ano yung risks natin dyan? When it comes to principles, these are our risks. We're not complying to the DDA principles. And as we mentioned earlier, that NPC already published its finalized draft of admin fines. Non-complying to the principle of DPA would actually constitute 1% to 5% of our annual gross income of the company. Okay? So if we don't conform, we don't necessarily practice transparency, we don't have legitimate purpose, we're collecting too much information or storing information, retaining information for prolonged periods of time, perpetually even, for no apparent reason, no legitimate purpose, then that's not complying. That's not conforming to the principles of data privacy. So we need to review it, the information we're collecting, how long we're storing them, to whom are we sharing them. We need to review these. We encounter incidents or breaches in CIA. Someone that should not have access to information was able to access confidential information. That's unauthorized access. Data was actually modified without the knowledge of or the approval from the data subject. And the data was not available. Nawala yung data, na-delete, na-misplace, nabura. That requires us to recollect the information from our applicants, from our data subjects. It begs the question, nasa na? Di ba binigay ko na sa inyo? So breach na CIA. And of course, we violated the rights of the data subject. They have the right to be informed. Hindi natin sila na-inform of the processing that we are doing. They don't know whom to contact in our company. Kaya often in privacy notices, we need to specifically mention how to get in touch with the data protection officer. We don't necessarily need to publish the names of the DPO Hindi naman siya part ng requirements ng isang privacy notice. However, we do need to mention how is a DPO contacted. So for any inquiries, complaints, or even breaches, reports of breaches, the data subject can actually reach out to that person or to the team of the data privacy department team or the data protection officers group. Yeah. So ito yung mga risks natin. If we don't follow the principles of data privacy, we violate, there's a breach already in CIA, so our security measures were compromised, or we're not following or upholding, and we violated the rights of the data subjects. So these are where the risks in personal data, especially employee personal data in the HR function, lie. Clear? So given itong tatlo na yan, these are some of the data privacy concerns, compliance with regards to HR operations. When regards to recruitment, okay, I would sum up the recruitment process in one word pagdating sa data privacy, in relation to data privacy. It's collection. Or if it's a phrase, it's a collection of personal data. Collection of personal data from applicants. So that's recruitment. Diba? Kasi if we don't collect information from applicants, then what are we screening? What are we evaluating with regards to recruitment? So these are just some of the concerns, questions. As we saw earlier in the Padlet activity we did, in some of your questions already in the chat box earlier. So these are questions regarding data privacy that relate to recruitment, talent acquisition, consent specificity and comprehensiveness, managing applicant resumes and retention periods, and data privacy in recruitment and selection. So when we say collection of personal data pagdating sa recruitment process, it begs the question, are we collecting only what's necessary? According to the National Privacy Commission, si Commissioner Liboro, during the Privacy Awareness Week in 2020, he said that we need only collect the information that we need and only disclose to the right people. So when it comes to recruitment, that's the first thing we need to understand. Are we collecting too much information? When conducting interviews, we need to probably now review or evaluate the questions that we ask during interviews or the questions being asked by in our application forms. There's malamang it's being practiced by most companies when doing recruitment. When getting family background, or asking the applicants to tell me something about yourself, it's too generic of a question. So the applicant tends to answer truthfully and fully. Ang dami na niya nasabi. Nasabi na niya kapitbahay niya, pamilya niya, lola niya, probinsya nila, na kailangan ba lahat yun in screening process? So it begs the question, baka the question or the statement, tell me something about yourself, needs to be rephrased already. Kasi it's too generic. The answer being solicited is too generic. That the applicant does not necessarily know ano ba yung scope lang ng kailangan niya sagutin. So tayo naman as the company that collects the information, HR, the recruitment personnel, the hiring officer, we're collecting too much information. So pagdating sa consent, we need to specify ano lang ba yung information we're collecting and for what purpose. If we're collecting contact information, we need to specify the purpose for collecting that person contact information. If we're collecting information about relatives, siblings, dependents, parents, and their birthdays even, or salary brackets, we need to specify bakit. Para saan? Anong purpose nun? If we don't have a specific purpose for these, then we need to remove them from our application forms and the consent forms. So when managing applicant resumes, I saw this being implemented even before data privacy. When I was applying for jobs back then, nakita ko nakalagay na, we will be restoring or retaining your information for 6 months. And after that, we'll be disposing them. Tapos, during that time, you don't need, pag mag-re-apply ka sa kanila, sa companies na to, you don't necessarily need to resubmit your information, your resume. Kasi in a span of 6 months, ano ba pwede magbago? Siguro minimal naman. sa work background, sa professional background ng tao. So, after 6 months, dispose na nila. So, din yung isang pwede. Or if pwedeng 1 year. Depends naman on the purpose for us of retaining these information. Especially for applicants that submitted but opted not to pursue their application, or for applicants that we declined. Diba? Ano yung, how long do we need to retain their information? Shortlisted ba sila? If they are, then we need to retain their information for probably a relatively longer period, siguro a year or so. But if they're not necessarily shortlisted, then the begs the question, bakit pa natin tinatago? Again, that goes for the retention period. So other companies would say na after the decline or disapproval of the application, or the applicant messages us and informs us that they will not pursue the application, other companies would retain the information collected from that applicant for 1 week. After that, it's disposed, completely disposed. Yung iba, they retain yung basic information, name lang, siguro kung kailan siya nag-apply. Kasi they want to have an inventory of sino-sino ba yung mga nag-apply na sa atin. So it now falls on the purposes that we have to retain this information. So like I said, these companies that I mentioned have different purposes kasi. So that's what I'm suggesting sa atin. But we need to review. How long are we retaining them? Para saan? And how are we going to dispose them? When it comes to data privacy in recruitment selection, what we would normally mention is disclose the information to the people that are part of the recruitment process. Kasi we've encountered companies na ang ginagawa nila, once ibigay nila yung profile, resume, work experience ng isang applicant to the hiring manager or whatnot, si hiring manager, sinishare niya sa buong team. Siguro, kasi para i-review ng team, screen ng team, pwede ito sa team natin, pwede hindi. However, ang naging practice, kung yung applicant type nung team, ang ginagawa, sinustok sa social media. Ina-add sa social media. So, is adding an applicant in social media as a friend, following them in the social media platforms, part of our recruitment process? If it is, then we need to inform the applicant. Now, you will be added in social media platforms. Pero it begs the question, bakit para saan? Pero if not, then wag natin siyang gawin. Wag natin siyang hayaan mangyari. Tinanong kanina in the Padlet, how can we prevent information being used by other people, especially HR information? Well, again, we need to implement principal least privilege. Kanino lang ba dapat sinishare? And once we share to the hiring manager, for example, we need to tell them, the hiring managers, na, ikaw lang may hawak na, hindi pwede i-disclose yan kahit kanino. We need to have stricter policies in place when it comes to the recruitment process, talent acquisition. Yeah. So I do hope with this example, with this at least for the recruitment process, we were able to kahit paano explain, in a way explain, this is what we're doing, this is our recommendation. Later, we'll give specific action steps for us to be able to carefully craft our security measures. So another HR operation and the data privacy compliance is information disclosure. So this would constitute sharing information to third-party providers, external partners, other companies doing background checks. Kaya pag may loan yung employee, may bank na tumawag, a former employee na may ina-applyan, sa tawag yung ina-applyan niyang company. So these are all disclosures diba? So information disclosure, ayan na yung phrase that I want to peg the this entire slide on. How much information do we need to disclose? Proportionality. And what's our basis to share the information, personal and sensitive personal information, to these either external entities, partners, or even internally? Ano ba yung purpose natin? Do we have proper documentation that states the disclosure of the information? So again, extent of sharing information during background investigations. Pag tayo mismo, when we do background information, a background investigation about people, about applicants, ano naman yung kinukuha natin information? And if we do we inform the applicant. We will be contacting these people, your references, and get information from you. Kasi ang tanong dyan, kunyari, yung supervisor na nilagay niya character reference, ang pwedeng tanongin nun, kunyari ako yung tinawagan, paano mo na yung information ko? Saan galing? Data privacy yun, agad. Sabihin siyempre natin, as HR, na nakuha po namin from an applicant that we have, and kayo need mong character reference. Yan. So, yun yung pwedeng solution natin doon. So, and of course, when doing background investigation, we need only to get yung information that are relevant to the recruitment process, to the position, job, function that the applicant is applying for. Okay? Collecting information through background information, tayo na yun. Pero pag may tumatawag sa atin, doing background information about other people, we need to always disclose ano lang yung kailangan. We don't necessarily need to disclose everything. And even we can even go to the extent of telling the people calling us, nakuha ba yung consent ng tao na yan na mag-background investigation ka? Paano kung hindi? Kasi nag-disclose tayo, then tayo naman yung lagot. Diba? So, yun yung pagdating sa disclosure. Ano ba yung purpose natin for disclosure? Do we have a documented permission from these individuals, the subjects, to disclose their information? Part ba siya ng employment contract natin? Pag may tumawag for a bank, yung employee natin nag-apply ng bank loan and so on. So disclose information when receiving service. So ano bang information hinihingi normally na service? Requiring employees to disclose vaccination status. Ayan. And health conditions. I mentioned before, aside from consent, which is the weakest form of lawful basis to process personal information, nandiyan yung contractual obligation. And of course, compliance to our law. And meron tayong batas that states that we need to disclose to the proper authorities, government agencies, entities, and health institutions, and even to our HR, kung policy na kumpanya, our health conditions. Diba, nagpa-vaccine ka na ba? Ano ba yung condition mo? And tinanong kanina, kung aside from the nurse, company nurse, doctors, and HR, sino ba dapat nakakalam? Begs the question, sino ba dapat nakakalam? Dapat ba malaman ng co-workers? Bakit? Baka hindi. Dapat HR lang. Kunyari physical exam tayo. Nakita natin yung employee, yung x-ray niya, merong some anomaly. Do we inform the team leader, the department head, may anomaly to, ganyan? Or we just inform the employee, nasa amin to, ganyan, ito yung gagawin. So, it begs the question, if we do inform other people, people other than the data subject, ano yung purpose? What's the purpose? And it's documented. So, yon. So, information disclosure. So, it's disclosure of sensitive personal information to anyone, internal man or external. So we need to have proper documentation for these. Is it part of our policies, company policy? Do we have data sharing agreements? How are our service level agreements with providers? Yung kunyari, consultant that would process tax, consultant that would process payroll, company that provides an HRIS. Ano yung information na sinishare natin sa kanila? Do we have proper documentations for those? Yun yung sinasabi natin. So, work from home and remote work arrangements, ito yung tinatanong kanina. And as we go through these community quarantines, lockdowns, it became more pertinent already since last year, since the implementation of the first implementation of our ECQ. So, we need to, for companies to be able to thrive, we really need to implement remote work arrangements. So, according to NPC, what do we need to have? We need to have clearly defined policies and guidelines. Kasi if kagaya malamang last year, when the ECQ was initially declared, all if not most companies tried to scramble. Parang paano tayo tuloy sa work natin, bigyan natin access yung mga tao, pinauwi yung mga computers, yung mga laptops, nag-apply ng VPN, pina-access yung information, naglagay ng cloud storage, para of course tumuloy yung trabaho. Pero if we have those, what are our policies to access those information? Which leads us to the second. Access to personal information, personal data, needs to be on an as-needed basis, not perpetual. Kung kailangan din, bigyan natin yung access. Kung hindi, stop muna natin. Hindi yung pwedeng continuous yung access niya. Paano pag hindi na kailangan? And this goes for physical and electronic documents. Kunyari, walang pandemic, walang lockdown, ganoon din. Pag physical documents, sino may access? Who needs to have access to the information? Kung nasa Google Sheets yan, online storage, and HRIS, anywhere, who has access to the information? And it needs to be monitored continuously. So monitoring company-issued computers and personal devices accessing corporate resources. So ultimately, it's not necessarily easy to monitor personal devices. It's personal nga. However, if the personal device is being used to access corporate resources, then doon natin siya pwede sabihan. Oops, if you're going to use your personal laptop, personal mobile device to access company resources, kailangan natin makita ano lang access mo dyan. We need to monitor them. Kasi if we give access to these people, to our employees, and they start accessing other information beyond their job function, beyond what they requested to access, it begs the question, bakit mo in-access yan? So, yan siya. It is something NPC, we need to start monitoring. And if our employees encounter incidents, nagkaroon ng ransomware, nakakuha ng phishing email, nagbukas ng link na hindi naman dapat, nagkaroon ng access sa computer, yung kung sino man, yung hacker. These needs to be reported immediately to the proper authorities. When I say proper authorities, yung incident response team natin. If the personnel does not know the identity of the DPO, which is bad, kailangan alam niya, the employee can actually reach out to the team lead, to the department head, and the department can escalate it to the DPO for the incident to be investigated. Para we can manage the security incident or the data breach accordingly. Kasi pag hindi, may nangyaring incident, kasi hindi agad nasabi, later na lang nasabi, 1 week later, 1 month later, that's considered a breach. And in our experience, it happens in a way more frequently during this pandemic. Kasi remote work, may nag-email yung isang tao, nasama niya yung personal information na hindi naman dapat niya nasama, ang ginagawa niya, tinatago na lang niya. Hindi niya sasabihin. Mangyayari, pag nag-imbestiga na ngayon yung team lead, uy, teka, bakit may ganitong email na padala? Saka pa lang siya aamin. Ay, sorry, napadala ko yan. Oops. In the eyes of the NBC, in the DPA, that's concealment of breach. And if memory serves me correctly, that would constitute around up to 1 million in fines. 500,000 to 1 million in fines. So we need to properly may report tree tayo. Kung may call tree, may reporting tree, incident response team in place. That our employees needs to know, so when they encounter incidents, they know whom to report to. And the DPO is always on his or her feet to actually investigate, address these incidents and breaches. We don't want to be caught flat-footed by the authorities, by National Privacy Commission. Na nangyaring breach, hindi kayo nag-respond, wala kayong notify. So what did you do? Hinayaan nyo lang ba? So, yan siya. So often, what we do is when we investigate, we write an incident, the DPO writes an incident report to document what happened. How was the incident identified all the way to how was it resolved? So when the NPC comes knocking on our door, we have something to show them. We have evidence that we were able to mitigate, address, and prevent it from recurring. So, yun. So these are the things that the NPC, National Privacy Commission, is saying that we need to be implementing now, especially now, again, with the ECQ again, and companies are starting again to do remote work. So outsourcing our processes, our systems, the systems that we're using, disclosure pa rin to eh. However, it comes up with a specific type of disclosure. When we outsource the systems that you're using, we get external auditors to review our process, our documents. We send out our employees for training. We outsource HR functions and services. So ano ba yung extent that we disclose information of our people, of our employees, to these providers of system, auditors, providers of training, consultants for HR functions. If we know already the extent of information we're sharing to them, are those documented in the form of service level agreements, probably with the providers of system, contracts with our outsourced consultants, with the training providers that we have, yung written agreements natin with external auditors, other than government inspectors. Siyempre for government inspectors, like what Sri mentioned earlier, they're mandated by the law. We're mandated by law to act by law, by DOLE, to actually share the information. So yan yung mga kailangan natin. Ano yung mga service level agreements, data sharing agreements, outsource agreements that we have in place, contracts. Do those have data privacy provisions, data protection elements in them? If not, then we need to review. We need to amend them, add provisions to them. Kunyari for HR, outsource ang HMO, ang bank. So ano ba yung mga agreements natin with these providers, with the banks, with HMOs? Kumusta ba? Ano ba yung nakalagay dyan? Kilala ba natin yung DPO nila? Does our DPO know their DPO? Para pag nagkaroon tayo ng problema regarding these, mayari, the systems or the banks or the HMOs, the training, ano ba yung sinishare natin sa training development? Para pag nagkaroon ng problema, the DPO can easily contact their DPO. So that's what we want to mention about outsourcing. Kasi outsourcing is also a, ano ba, hindi man buzzword. It's also a common word used in HR function, HR profession. Clear? Again, I'm seeing that people are typing dun sa ating chat box. Sige lang. We'll get to address those later.
Go filing them, Sir Buboy.
Sige lang. Thank you, Charm. We'll get to address those later. I believe patapos naman na yung part na to ng ating presentation. So, common HR questions na hindi naman natin na-discuss before. So, ito yan. How is data privacy essential to HR? Often, tinatanong yan. Parang, importante ba ang data privacy sa HR? Is data privacy relevant to HR? I would actually throw the question back at you, to all of us. Sige nga. Show of hands. For those na just either hi or react. Do you think data privacy is important in HR? That's my question. Thank you. Some thumbs up. Anyone else? Thank you. Meron po ba? Then, thank you sa mga nagre-react. So, ang tanong natin, is data privacy important to HR? For those who reacted, yes, thank you. Siguro sa mga nag-chat, yes, very, 100%. Yes, thank you. Good. At least now, we have a better understanding that data privacy is important to the HR function, HR profession, because of the wealth of information we're processing in the HR function. It's mostly personal and sensitive information of people, not just our employees. So it's fairly important. So what does that imply? We now need to comply with data privacy regulations by implementing data protection security measures. Later, we'll jump into that. Ano ba yung mga pwedeng security measures, compliance activities that we actually need to perform, to conduct, to accomplish in order to comply. Since alam natin, essential ang data privacy sa HR. How does data privacy affect us as part of human resources? Ayan, basically, nasagot na rin siya kanina. How is it? Thank you, 100%. Definitely. So how does it affect us? We need to comply with data protection regulations. As HR professionals in an organization, tayo malimit yung that spearheads compliance for any other regulation or standard. Magkakilala ko sa HR. Parang HR almost always champions compliance to standards, regulations. Yeah. So that's how we are affected. We need to follow. We need to comply. Ayaw natin na paper compliance lang. We need to operationalize these requirements. Limits in Data Privacy Act in relation with employee data. Sige, when you say limit, the way we understand this statement is hanggang saan lang si data privacy. So like we mentioned during the first slides and during the recap, data privacy protects the information of individuals, that is the subject, employees. So yun yung limit ng data privacy. If HR people, HR professionals also store, process information of other companies, company information, corporate information, hindi na siya part ng data privacy. As long as it's information about an individual, data subject, personal, sensitive, minsan financial kasama, privilege, yan, kasama siya. It's part of the data privacy. Beyond that, baka hindi. Para clear, to answer the limits in data privacy. So, it is also a question being asked, career path ng isang DPO. In an HR perspective, obviously, we need to care about employee development. Tama po ba? I do hope I got that correctly. So often, we need to come up with competency programs, how to improve the skill sets of our employees. Kaya nga may training and development. Tama? I do hope yung pa rin when I encountered HR back in the day, when we were implementing an HRIS system, kasama siya eh. Training and development of employees is part of it. So competency development is part of that. Na meron tayong meron tayong 1-year action plan for an employee. A DPO also has a career path, also has a competency development plan. Kasi DPO needs to be tooled and retooled about their role as a DPO. Kailangan alam nila ano ba yung bagong trends, ano ba yung mga bagong threats, ano ba yung mga updates sa batas about the Data Privacy Act. So when we hire a DPO, we need to build their competence. Okay. First, we need to check, are they qualified to handle the role? Are they competent? And then when we get them, we also need to build their skill set. It's part of the later we'll see. It's part of the 10-point compliance framework of NPC. Building the competencies of the DPO, of the compliance team, continuous training of the entire organization regarding data protection. So part siya. Yun nga lang, sorry, yung other side of this coin, which I've encountered several companies already. When they hire DPO and they start building their competence by sending them for training, true enough, ang ginagawa ng DPO, sige nga, kung malalaman ng mga tao, ano ginagawa ng DPO after ma-train? Kunyari, after getting training for 3 to 4 months, what do DPOs normally do for those who have encountered that? Kung wala, okay lang. Ang nakita kong ginagawa ng ibang DPO, they resign. They move on to another company, of course, with better compensation and benefits. Kasi they now are more capable of performing the role. So that happens. Nag-resign, yes. So that's a reality. So what do we do? Ayan. We now need to take care of our employees. So what do? I throw the question back at you, our HR professionals. So what do? How can we retain employees better? Kasi by the DPA, by the law, the DPO role must be a regular employee. Or if not, if it's a contractual role, it needs to be a 2-year engagement para to ensure continuous compliance. Siyempre, if it's a regular employee that would resign later after 6 months, the compliance becomes discontinued. May non-continuity sa compliance. So how do we make sure that is happening? How do we make sure that continuous pa rin yung compliance natin? So that's a question I throw back at us as HR professionals. But to tell you, may career path sa BPO. Especially now, companies are still looking for data protection officers. Marami pa rin naghahanap. how to deal with an employee who leaks data privacy. Yan. We encountered this question earlier sa Padlet natin kanina. Paano nga pa pag yung employee either accidentally disclose information or intentionally with malice in mind discloses information, personal information. So how do we deal with those? To share, I've encountered companies, we consulted for companies who encountered both. Either accidentally nawala information, nakuha na ibang tao, or intentionally na share sa ibang tao. In both cases, ang tanong sa akin ng HR, pwede ba natin i-terminate yung tao? My immediate question was, do you have a policy for that? Do you have a policy for termination? Or ano, may sinasabi rin si Dole about termination din. Kasi if you don't, then wala tayong magagawa. Ang ginawa ng isang company, they suspended the employee for 2 weeks. Tapos, pagbalik, they moved the employee to a different department for misplacing information. Personal information of up to more than 100 people yata. Kasi documents na wala. And containing supporting documents which are valid IDs. Photocopies of valid IDs. So, sinuspend nila yung tao, nilipat nila ng department. Wala silang magawa. Yung iba naman, nag-investigate, nag-uusapan, eventually, yung employee, siya na yung nag-resign, siya na yung umalis. For whatever reason. So, I throw the question back at us. Back at you, HR professionals. So, ano bang pwedeng gawin pag may nangyaring ganyan? But what we do recommend is have a policy in place. Ano lang bang pwedeng ma-disclose? Kanino? Like scope and limitations of the job function. Now, it begs the question, do we continuously review the job descriptions of our employees, the employment contracts of our employees, to the NDAs signed by our employees, to specifically add data privacy provisions, data protection provisions. Para protected tayo, our company, when it comes to this. Clear po? And lastly, ito tinatanong normally sa amin during the registration and during the actual info session and even during workshops that we conducted. Are there templates of data privacy documents available? Now, to share, yung DPA toolkit ng National Privacy Commission, they actually have templates already. Meron siyang guidelines on how privacy notices are written. Meron siyang guidelines or an outline even of a privacy manual. Meron siyang outline on consent forms, data sharing agreements. Meron din silang Circular 1802 that is a template already for incident reports. So when we need to submit our annual incident report, which is normally around June, July, meron silang format for that. Meron din silang format for mandatory data breach notifications. So these are already available online. So privacy.gov.ph sa NBC website. If you want, we can provide you a link for that. So, we can for an online storage where you can access these documents. Pwede naman siguro, available naman yan. Para hindi na sila maghanap sa NBC website kasi medyo iisa-isayin nila yung pages. Pwede naman natin ibigay. Libre naman yan.
Send na lang namin via email. Kasama dun sa thank you letter for those who attended.
Or baka, a link na lang kasi medyo mahaba. Marami.
The link.
The link to these files. We can send those to you para you have already a basis on paano nyo ba susulat yan. So yung tanong na lang would be, ano ba ang isusulat dyan? Kasi normally, pa natin tanong. With that, balik tayo sa ating Q&A. Data privacy risks in HR. Charm?
Ready ka na ba?
Yes, go.
Marami.
Sige lang.
Okay, dali. Balik tayo doon sa sa question since this morning na I think hindi pa napag-uusapan. 201 forms being prepared by someone which is not part of his job description. And several question related to that, how can we put parameters on people who can access or work on 201 files?
Yun. Okay, good question regarding personnel performing the work na hindi naman nila dapat gawin. So that includes access to personal data. Okay? And yung other side of that, paano natin masabi na sino na dapat may access? Okay. So initially what we would mention to you, to all of us is we need to review the job descriptions. Yung employment contract, yung job functions. Kasi yun naman yung magsasabi. Ano lang ba pwede gawin ng isang tao? Tama po ba? As HR practitioners, professionals. I guess yun siya. If you have other means to actually declare what a person can only do and cannot do, then place it there. Kung meron tayong company policies na dapat si HR personnel 1, ito lang nagagawa, si HR officer 1, ito lang nagagawa, then have those in place. Kasi at least having them documented would make it easier for the company to implement yung user access control. We consulted for a company recently na, though not necessarily HR, when they were sending out documents to their members and sometimes employees. So they print several documents, they put them in envelopes, and then they they send them yung papel mismo, yung mail, not necessarily electronic. Since napakarami, they actually ask their custodians, yung mga janitors nila, yung mga other people, to help them with preparing these envelopes for delivery. So, it's similar to the question dito eh. Parang, it begs the question, part ba yun ng kailang job description? Yes, tumutulong. Good. May initiative to help. Yes, kailangan ng tulong. Good, kasi masyadong maraming trabaho. Pero it begs the question, do they have the proper authority to actually proper authorities, responsibilities, privileges to access those information? Kung wala, then it begs the question, bakit natin siya ginagawa? So that's what we want to drive at. So we need to review our job descriptions, our policies, our employment contracts with our employees to see ano nga ba lang pwedeng mong gawin. Kasi if we keep assigning work to our employees na hindi naman nila dapat ginagawa, that involves accessing personal data, then it begs the question, bakit nila na-access? Kung hindi naman pala dapat nila na-access. So reviewing those documents is one of the second things that we need to do. I mentioned second because meron akong babanggitin later. Ano ba yung first thing that we need to do? So reviewing these documents, policies, will be the second thing that we need to do. Okay?
There's a question here na medyo hindi ako sure on what she or he means. HR personnel are considered confidential employees. Is it an absolute right for them to have a DPA?
Is it an absolute right for them to have
a DPA? I think the question means if the HR personnel are the personnel themselves are under the Data Privacy Act, in which I would say yes, kasi you also are employees.
Mukhang kailangan natin i-clarify yung tanong na yun kasi it can go either way. Pero to support your answer, to add what Char mentioned, anyone in the company that process personal information, it's in the scope of the DPA. The company itself is in the scope of the DPA. So we need to have all these policies in place to indicate, specifically mention that they have access to these. So hindi porket HR ka, by default, you have access to personal data na kahit hindi na documented. That's a good example of a misunderstanding again. So better still to have it documented. Kasi kahit HR ka, meron pa ring limitations yung role. Kunyari, meron kang recruitment officer. Ang focus lang niya recruitment. So pwede ba siya mag-access ng payroll? I guess hindi. Yung payroll officer, pwede ba siya mag-access ng mga applicants? I guess hindi. Kasi employees ang focus niya. That's how we interpreted the question. So kung sakaling hindi yung tinutukoy ng question, do clarify for us. But that's how we understand the question. yan yung kailangan gawin. We need to have these in place, policy in place, pa rin, documentations specifically saying, ito yung ginagawa ng bawat tao in the company, not just in HR. Charm?
Okay. Do we require a DPA statement on all paperworks that we ask our applicants, new hires, and employees if we are asking for personal information?
Ayan, nakita natin yung question na yun kanina sa Padlet yata.
Okay.
Sabi natin na yes. Parang for applicants, since we don't have any other documentation that allows for the processing of their personal information, we need to have consent. For employees, normally meron tayong employment contract, so contractual obligation. For any other data subject, especially kung wala naman tayong contractual obligation with them, walang kontrata, walang proposal, walang agreement, and then a consent would suffice. For external parties, for external partners, service providers, again, hindi man consent, but we have service level agreements. Mga data sharing agreements, contracts. Yeah. So we need to have these still in place, documented. Kung pansin natin, yun yung sinasabi natin ever since we started. It needs to be documented, it needs to be written. Hindi pwedeng implied, hindi pwedeng sinabi lang. So yun. Charm?
All right. Another question na bibigyan ko na ng quick answer. Are email addresses considered as sensitive information? In sending out notice to interviews to several applicants, do we have to send it via BCC since applicants may see email addresses of other applicants? So email addresses are considered personal but not sensitive. But this is a good practice that you're doing na naka-BCC because it's important na magkaroon din ng confidentiality between the applicants themselves na hindi nila alam kung sino-sino yung mga kasama nila.
Exactly.
So you mentioned na you use BCC, that's good. And if you're using Gmail, you may also try using Gmail or something similar para hindi sila magkaalaman. And the next, sige po.
To add to what Charm is mentioning, kasi syempre, we still want to protect the identities, the privacy of the other applicants. Kasi pag nilagay lang natin sila sa clause or sa CC clause section ng ating email, hindi nagkakitaan na sila lahat. Pwede sila mag-stalk ng isa't isa. Diba? So we don't want that. We still want to protect the identities of the other applicants. So BCC is one way. Siyempre yung mas mahirap is isa-isa silang padalhan, lalo na kung iba-iba yung schedule or what. Pero yun, to what Charm said, BCC is another way to do that. Pero just don't put them blatantly in the to section or the CC section na lahat sila nagkakitaan. Charm?
Okay. What to do with the applicant who was not hired but posting malicious statement against the company to social media after being declined? Interesting.
Fair point. Well, in data privacy, medyo wala tayong magagawa. We cannot, of course, slander the person based on what we know about the person. We cannot necessarily do harm to them. But in data privacy, Pero for, I guess, I'm not sure kung merong other regulations, laws that protect somebody for that. Pero I would revert to ano ba yung policy natin as a company when that happens. Pero with regards to the data privacy perspective, hindi natin sila pwedeng siraan, hindi natin sila pwedeng slander for that. Kasi ano niya yun right pa rin naman niya na protected natin yung data, yung privacy ng data niya. So, ganun siya. Especially now, in this day and age, where anyone can post anything about anyone. So, medyo, it's not as easy to police or rather manage. So, now, kasi maraming ganun yun siguro. Ano ba yung policy natin as a company when we do encounter those? We consulted for several companies na yan yung nangyari sa kanila, na sinisiraan sila or minsan i-impersonate yung mga tao nila. Diba? Pag ganun, pag in-impersonate yung tao nila, then that's a data privacy breach. Diba? Kunyari, yung isang taong may sama ng loob sa kumpanya, nagpanggap na isa sa mga officers ng kumpanya, then nakakuha ng information from other people, nakakuha ng pera. Yun, that's data privacy. Na pwedeng habulin yung tao. Pero kung sinisiraan yung company mismo, tapos wala namang personal information na involved, hindi naman sinaraan yung HR officer, recruitment officers, sinabi ko sa nakatira, wala naman ganun. Wala tayong, in data privacy perspective, medyo wala tayong magagawa doon. Maybe there are other provisions that we can use to pursue, diba? Yung maling ginawa ng tao. Charm?
Okay, I found a question that is very related, somehow related to that. Can HR post names of employees on Facebook? Example, promotions, raffle winners, etc.
Okay, sige. Akala ko yung slander pa rin. So pag-post ng HR ng personal information of employees who, let's say, won raffles, ganyan. It begs the question, saan pin-post? Is it sa public wall where everyone can see? Is it in a Facebook group page na, yes, kayo-kayo lang yung members at hindi siya public? And is it part of your policy to actually post it? To share, may mga personalities who would say na, we won't name them, may mga personalities na sabihin nila, oh, send me your contact information, your name, and then I'll be sending you whatever, financial aid, benefits, and ganyan. So, ang ginagawa ng mga tao, pinapost nila sa comment for all to see. HR naman, mayroong companies na nagpo-post ng job opening in Facebook. So, ang ginagawa, without any other instruction to applicants, ang ginagawa ng applicant, nagpo-post ng personal information as comment to that post, which is public. So, tayo as HR practitioners, HR professionals, we have the responsibility to actually inform our applicants na, huy, okay dyan ma-post. Kasi they're exposing themselves. Yun nga lang, they're exposing themselves because of what we did, because of the post that we did, without necessarily giving them specific instructions on how they can actually send us their personal information. So, in a way, tayo responsible for those. Even though they gave the information, tayo pa rin kasi yung responsible. It's our post. The most we could do is delete each of those comments and tell them na, hindi, send your personal information, your resume through these proper mediums, through these job application platforms, or to our email itself. So, yan yung mga kailangan ingatan natin. So, we need to look out for these, especially pagdating sa social media na hindi mo na everything, most things get easily publicized, easily published for the consumption of everyone. So, gusto mong malaman na yung isang employee mo nanalo ng isang kotse, nanalo ng bahay at lupa, nanalo ng 1 million. So, what happens to that person? Lagot siya, malamang may risk na agad sa kanya. Either stalk na siya or what. So, if it's a private group na kayo-kayo lang in the organization, okay lang. If it's an internal communication medium that you use, you publicize there, I guess okay lang. Especially kung yun naman din yung policy na ina-announce sa buong company yung kung sino nanalo, then okay lang. Huwag lang natin i-expose too much to individuals na hindi naman dapat nakakala. The most nga, the least we could, or yung safest we could do is send an email or personal message to that person, yung nanalo ka to claim your prize. That's it. Diba? Not necessarily publishing it for the entire users of social media to see. Yeah.
Okay. Hello?
Charm?
Okay. So I chose, we have a lot of several of questions here, but I'm going to choose a few more na lang due to lack of time. So sana wag kayo magalit.
11:48 na pala, sorry.
Sana wag magalit pag hindi natawag kasi pasensya na marami po.
There's still, so last question na lang, Charm, kasi we still have one agenda left.
Talaga?
Yung takeaway points.
Sige, ito na lang. How do we request from management or staff to have a DPA or Data Privacy Act? I guess baka wala pang policies and they wanted to request.
Kunyari as HR, di ba? Paano natin, how can we initiate? How can we tell management, oh, we need this? Well, for one, we need to inform management. Now, we need to comply. As HR practitioners, as professionals who attended this info session, we need to convince them. We need to inform them, we need this. We need DPA, we need a DPO, kung pasok tayo sa criteria, we need to register our DPO, we need to register our company. So, kasi kailangan management buy-in para top-down yung approach natin. If you want, we can, for those companies who still need help convincing their management, you can talk to us offline. We can conduct separate sessions with your management para to drive in the notion or the sentiment or the requirement that we need to comply with the DPA. Kung tingin nyo nahihirapan kayo to convince management. I've met several even DPOs or HR practitioners na nahihirapan mag-convince the management. So they tap us, we convince them na hindi kailangan kasi natin to ganyan. So you can communicate to us, contact us separately para to help you start building that culture of security and privacy in your organization by convincing top management. Sige. By looking at time, 10 minutes na lang kasi, so I'll try to breeze through the remaining section of our info session today. If you have other questions that you want us to ask, just email na lang muna. Okay, so we'll try to answer quick questions, or we can even schedule discussions with you and your DPO or your manager. Okay. So takeaway points lang for the compliance requirements. So ito yung mga immediately na pwede natin gawin as we start complying or continue our compliance with the Data Privacy Act. So data privacy becomes a public marker for safety already. So what does that mean? So we now need to appoint our DPO, our Data Protection Officer. Like I said, yung mandatory registration kanina was for mandatory registration. It does not mean if we don't fall in those criteria, we don't need to comply. We still need to comply. Okay? We may not need to register, but we need to comply. We need to implement our day-to-day privacy documents, security measures. So we need to create and post our privacy notices, implement our consent forms, implement our privacy manuals. If you notice, I'm not saying draft or write our consent forms, privacy notices, and manuals. I'm saying implement our consent forms, privacy manuals, privacy notices, data sharing agreements, contracts, implement. Not necessarily just write them. Review our contracts and update them with our service providers, create data sharing agreements, outsource agreements to infuse data privacy provisions. And a way to do holistic approach to data privacy compliance is evaluating our data processing systems, performing risk assessment, addressing the risk to personal data. So another one is implement, I guess kanina, our privacy manuals. Kasi sa privacy manual, nakalagay dyan all of our security measures that we implement, that we set out to implement in our companies. Data security, implement, again, sorry if I'm being a broken record, implement the organizational, technical, and physical security measures. Writing policies, writing procedures, implementing antiviruses, firewalls, ISMS, information security management systems, would not be enough. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's the people that process the information that we need to monitor. So they need to know how to protect personal information. Kasi pag hindi na alam, what are we going to monitor? Malamang magkakamali sila. So when it comes to performing risk assessment, yung PIA na sinasabi, yung Privacy Impact Assessment, the PIA is actually a four-part activity, compliance activity. We first build the DPS inventory, the data processing systems inventory. Ito yung nabanggit natin during the first part that we had. And then understand how data flows through each of those processes from collection, usage, paano siya dinidisclose, and how are we retaining them, diba, disposing them. And then, ano yung mga risks to the data, personal data, in each of those phases ng personal data. And of course, address the data privacy risks. Okay? So, it's a four-phase compliance activity that we need to perform. I mentioned earlier, we need to review job descriptions, consent forms. That's the second thing we need to do. What's the first thing you need to do? Apart from appointing a DPO, it's conducting the privacy impact assessment. Without the privacy impact assessment, we don't know which security measures we need to implement. We don't know what provisions the consent form that we need to write. To whom are we sharing personal information? The PIA helps us do that. So when building the DPS inventory, when it comes to identifying ano ba yung processes na meron, kasi we've met companies sabi, hindi naman namin pinaprocess yung information, we just store them. We just retain them. Unfortunately, storage, retention is already processing. Hindi porket hindi mo ginagamit, we're not using the information, we're not processing it. These are some of the examples, according to the DPA, that constitutes processing: collection, recording, storage, updating, use, consolidation, disclosure, destruction, retrieval. These are just some of the actions that constitute processes. Okay? Maring hindi natin ginagamit, we're not using it, but still we're processing. Clear? So, given these are the processing of personal data, I do hope it gives us an idea. So ano yung mga processes na meron tayo in HR that we need to write in our data processing systems inventory? Kasi when building the data processing systems inventory, these are the things that we need to have. Ano ba yung pangalan ng process na yan? What's the data processing system name? Is it electronic or manual or both? What's the purpose or the description of that data processing system? Are we the personal information controller or the processor? Is it outsourced? If it's disclosed externally, diba? Outside the country, outside the organization, is it transferred outside the Philippines? Kung meron tayong other partners, ibang bansa, mga big companies that we share information with. Ano ba yung personal information involved? Name, full name, birthday, work, education, health, contact information, government IDs. So yun yung personal data, personal information involved. Who are our data subjects? Applicants, employees. So yeah, we need to identify sino ba yung mga yan. And are we using a system that provides automated decision making for this process? So these are the things that we need to have when building the data processing systems inventory for each of our processes in our organization. You can start with the HR process. So ito yung unang-unang kailangan gawin before we go on to identifying the personal data flow, risk assessment, and then treatment. Kasi risk treatment, yun yung mga security measures that we'll be writing down in our privacy manuals and implementing. So compliance is not a one-time activity. It's a continuous program. It's not a project na time-bound. So breaches to data privacy needs to continuously be monitored. Kasi hindi natin alam when the next breach will happen. It's not a question of if the breach will happen, but rather when will the next breach happen. Kailan yung next na pagkakamali ng employee na nag-share ng information na hindi dapat, na na-delete yung information na hindi dapat. Continuous training. We mentioned earlier yung DPO career path. It's part of the 10-point compliance framework of the NPC. Manage HR. Recurring training on data protection for the DPO, the compliance team, and the entire organization. I mentioned earlier, how often do we do fire drills and earthquake drills? If we do them once a year, are we assured that our people, our employees know what to do? Same with data privacy. If we do an awareness session now, if you orient them to our security measures now, what's our assurance that in a month's time, 2 months' time, they still know what they need to do, how to protect personal information? And rather, pagdating sa continuity, yung mga security measures that we identify now and we set out to do now, how sure are we in 6 months they're still effective? Same goes with the processes. Most likely, the processes that we implemented, performed back in 2019, nagbago na sila ngayon. Sure na. Since with all of the remote work, companies transforming to digital, some of the processes that we do manually before, naging electronic na yung form, yung base. So yeah, kasama yan. So it's continuous review. That's why we mentioned that it's not a one-time activity, it's a continuous event. And of course, privacy ecosystem. Nagbabago yung standards ng technology. There are continuous updates to the law. And what we normally share is nagiging creative ang magnanakaw. To share, to pay for information. Hindi lang pera kasi nanako ngayon, information na rin. Clear? So with that, so our question is, in this, for your data privacy compliance in this digital environment that we're in now, we're still in the thick of the pandemic, we're going into our third ECQ lockdown. Which path will you choose for your data privacy compliance? Is it paper compliance, willful non-compliance, or will you operationalize the compliance activities that you said that you will be doing? Are you going to committedly comply with the DPA or any other data protection regulations or any other issuances of the National Privacy Commission? So that's our question. So with that, to end our entire discussion, just about us, the Learning Innovation Hub is a learning and technology solutions provider in the Philippines and Vietnam. So the goal is to provide quality learning, innovative technology solutions. So that's LAHPH. Cosate naman is a GRC firm that we delve in governance, risk, and compliance. So compliance to regulations, international standards, and part of that is the Data Privacy Act or data protection regulations. We provide holistic approaches to our services. We empower organizations by building a culture of privacy and security, and we tailor fit yung consultancy engagements namin for the organization's requirements. So yung a few of our clients already that we consulted for through the years. Ito, contact us. If you have questions, like we mentioned earlier, if you want us to continue our discussion offline, kasi limited lang yung 12 na pala, last slide na to. If you want to continue our discussion, if you want us to help you bring the importance of data privacy to your top management, do approach us. Ito yung ating email addresses. You can easily contact us with that. Tapos, we do have some upcoming activities. Kasi we mentioned yung PI is something that we need to do. And after that, it's crafting the document. We do have workshops scheduled towards the end of August, yung privacy impact assessment. And by September, we also have a workshop on crafting the privacy documents that we need. So if you're interested, we'll be sending out the registration links to these. Feel free to contact the LAHPH and do wait for their announcements pag open na yung registration. So yan siya. So if you want more information about data privacy, ano pa ba yung meron tayo, how else can LAHPH and COSAIN help you with your compliance programs, do reach out to us and follow us in our social media platforms. With that, thank you. Sorry we don't have enough time sa mga other questions. We hope na sana we have time to answer your questions, pero alas 12 na pala, sorry. Again, if you do have questions, poignant questions, lingering questions, eating you, do send us your questions. We can set meetings with you and answer them with your respective companies. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you. Thank you for your participation, for your for the Padlets that we did with Mentimeter, for answering our quick game kanina in jumbled words on data privacy. Thank you. Maraming salamat. So with that, Ms. Miles?
Thank you, Sir Ernest and Ms. Charm Dogma. And thank you for who participate this info session program. If you have concerns, queries, or need clarifications, please don't hesitate to send us an email. Recorded video of our info session is also up via Google Classroom, which I will include the link together with your certificate. Again, thank you and stay safe.
Thank you everyone. Happy lunch. And Friday na pala ngayon, so happy weekend tomorrow. Keep safe. Kasi tumataas pa rin yung we're still in the thick of the pandemic. So thank you everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The evaluation link will be shared in your emails na lang by LAHPH. Sorry, if you're still there, may mga quick questions lang. Is there any form for attendance? I believe ang meron tayo is a certificate of participation for those who